The desert outside Cassidy Flats holds its breath before a killing. It always does. The main street ran straight and flat and empty, the way it always ran in the hour before sundown. Red dust, hitching posts, a bank with fresh white paint that didn't belong to the mouth it was in. And at the far end of the street where the copper light pooled thick as blood against the storefronts, 5 armed men on horseback waited for one woman to give up and go home. She didn't go home. She walked toward them. Small, dark dress, hair pulled back tight, both hands loose at her sides. She walked the way a person walks when they have already decided everything that matters, and the only thing left is the arriving. One of the men laughed. Then something happened that nobody in that town had ever seen before, and nobody who saw it ever forgot it. And for the rest of their lives, when someone asked them what she was, widow, school teacher, ghost, they would go quiet for a moment before they answered, because they still weren't sure which one was true. The desert does not forgive small things. A man who forgets to water his horse, a woman who forgets to watch the door, a town that forgets to ask questions about the man buying up its land one deed at a time. Cassidy Flats had forgotten all 3, but Rose Calloway had not forgotten a single thing in her life. Not one. Not the smell of gun oil on her father's hands when she was 4 years old. Not the sound her mother made the night Frank Calloway rode away and didn't come back. Not the exact weight of a Colt single-action army revolver, 2 pounds, 4 ounces, unloaded the way it settles into the palm like it was always supposed to be there. She had not forgotten any of it. She had simply learned to carry it quietly. The schoolhouse sat at the north end of town, between the feed store and a gap in the fence where someone had once planned to build a church and never got around to it. 3 windows, 1 door, a wood stove in the corner that smelled like pine sap and old smoke. 14 desks arranged in 4 uneven rows, because the room wasn't quite wide enough for 5. Rose had counted the desks on her first morning. She had also counted the windows, the distance from the door to the stove, the number of steps between the back wall and the front, the angle of the morning sun through the east-facing glass, and whether it would blind her or the person standing in the doorway. Old habit. Impossible habit. The kind of habit that never goes away. No matter how long you stand in front of a chalkboard, pretending to care about long division. She had arrived in April, 6 months ago. A widow from Abilene, Kansas, looking for quiet. That was the story she gave to Sheriff Olin Pruitt when he met her at the edge of town and squinted at her like a man trying to remember if he'd left something on the stove. Schoolteacher, she had said. We had one, he replied. Left in February. Why? Pruitt had looked out at the flat brown nothing stretching in every direction and said, reckon she found somewhere better to be. Rose had looked at the same flat brown nothing and nodded slowly. I'll take the position, she said. He had stared at her for a long moment. A small woman, dark auburn hair pulled back tight under a plain gray bonnet, green eyes that did not blink as often as most people's, a carpet bag in one hand and a steamer trunk on the wagon behind her that was heavier than it had any right to be for a school teacher's belongings. You sure? He said. I am, and that had been that. The children of Cassidy Flats were not particularly remarkable. 14 of them, ages 6 to 13, from families that farmed or ranched or ran small shops and spent a lot of time looking at the sky, hoping for rain that rarely came. They were sunburned and gap-toothed and loud in the way that children are loud when there is too much open space around them and not enough walls to absorb the noise. Rose liked them considerably, not because they were sweet. Some of them weren't, not because they were eager learners. Most of them weren't that either. She liked them because they were honest. A child who doesn't want to learn arithmetic will tell you so directly. A child who thinks your dress is ugly will say it to your face. A child who is frightened will cry, or go quiet, or both. No pretending, no performance. Rose had spent enough years around men who perform to last a lifetime. She taught them to read first, always reading first. A person who can read can learn anything else on their own. That was her philosophy, and she held to it with the kind of quiet stubbornness that doesn't announce itself and doesn't apologize. Tommy Sutherland, 10 years old, the blacksmith's son, had looked up at her on the 3rd day and said, Miss Rose, my pa says book learning don't put food on the table. Rose had set down the primer and looked at him. Can your pa read a land deed? She asked. Tommy thought about it. Reckon not. Then someone else decides what his land is worth, she said, and that someone else can read. Tommy had picked up the primer again. She rose every morning at 4:30, not because she needed to. The school didn't start until 8. The walk from her rented room at Ida Marsh's boarding house to the schoolhouse took 4 minutes. 5 if the wind was bad. 4:30 was habit. 4:30 was the hour her father had pulled her out of bed every morning for 8 years. Standing in the dark Texas doorway, with his hat already on and his eyes already sharp, saying, "Day's already started, Rosie. You're just catching up." She hated it. She also never stopped doing it. In the dark hour before Cassidy Flats woke up, she would slip out the back of the boarding house and walk east along the dry creek bed, where the mesquite grew thick enough to block sight lines from the road. She would walk for 20 minutes, find a spot, stand still and practice. Not with the Colt, not always. Sometimes just the draw, the motion, elbow back, wrist forward, the weight of the empty holster snapping to position, over and over again, until the motion was not something she thought about, but something her body did the way her lungs did breathing. Some mornings she worked on the Winchester instead, prone position in the dry creek bed, elbows braced in the sand, working the lever until the rhythm became automatic. Load, cycle, aim. The imaginary target in the brush 40 yards out, then 60, then 80. She never fired. The sound carried too far in the desert morning. But the practice was the practice. Her father had told her once she must have been 9 years old. Sitting in the Texas dust with a Colt she could barely hold steady in both hands. The gun doesn't make you dangerous, Clara Rose. The preparation does. The gun is just the last 3 seconds. She had not understood it then. She understood it completely now. Ida Marsh ran the boarding house the way a quartermaster runs a supply depot, efficiently, without sentiment, with a complete and detailed knowledge of everything inside its walls and everything coming through its door. She was 45 years old, broad-shouldered, with iron gray hair she wore in a single braid down her back, and a face that had been outdoors for all of those 45 years, and showed it. She had come to Cassidy Flats with her husband in 1871. Her husband had died of fever in 1874. Ida had stayed because, as she told Rose on their second evening, I'd already built the place and I wasn't about to let it go to someone else. She cooked breakfast at 5:30, whether anyone came down for it or not. Rose always came down. "You're always up before the birds," Ida said one morning in July, setting a tin mug of coffee on the table without being asked. "Old habit," Rose said. "From what?" Rose wrapped both hands around the mug. "Ranch work." Ida looked at her hands. The left one, ordinary enough. The right one, a small callus on the inside of the thumb. The kind of callus that comes from a specific kind of work. Not ranch work, not school teaching, not anything Ida could name exactly, but something specific and repeated and purposeful. Ida did not say anything about it. This was one of the things Rose appreciated about Ida Marsh. She saw things, she catalogued them. She chose carefully what she spoke aloud and what she filed away in that orderly mind of hers. "More coffee?" Ida said. "Please," said Rose. They understood each other very well, without ever saying so directly. The town itself was unremarkable in the way that most small New Mexico Territory towns were unremarkable in 1884. One main street, packed earth worn down by wagon wheels and horse hooves to something close to pavement, a general store. A saloon called the Gilded Spur that wasn't gilded, and had no spur but had excellent whiskey, according to the men who frequented it. A blacksmith. A small bank building with a new coat of white paint that stood out against everything else, like a tooth that didn't belong to the mouth it was in. That bank was Edmund Vane's. Well, Vane's name was on the door. Vane's money had built it. Whether it was truly a bank, in the sense most people understand banks, a place where money is held in trust, where depositors are protected, where loans are made in good faith, was a question that the citizens of Cassidy Flats had not yet thought to ask. They would think to ask it, soon. But in the slow brown October of 1884, Edmund Vane was simply the man with the bank, the man with the biggest house at the south end of town, the man who wore a vest that cost more than most of their weekly wages, who smiled with all his teeth, who shook hands firmly and looked you in the eye and said things like, "I believe in this community, and the future of this territory is bright," with the practiced conviction of a man who has said those exact words in at least 3 other towns before this one. Rose had identified him on her second day, not because of anything he said, because of the way he moved through a room, the way his eyes tracked exits, the way he stood slightly angled, never fully squared to any person he was talking to. The way his smile was always one beat ahead of his eyes, like a man who has learned to perform warmth rather than feel it. She knew that posture. She had grown up watching it. Her father had that posture. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway had reached a decision point in the fall of 1884. The line had been pushing southwest through the territory for 2 years, eating up desert mile by mile, bringing with it the peculiar violence of progress, the transformation of empty land into valuable land almost overnight, the way the presence of a railroad line could turn worthless scrub into something worth killing for. Land along the projected route, land in the path of new towns that would spring up around water stops and freight depots, land that currently belonged to ranchers and farmers and small-town families who had no idea what it was worth and no lawyer to tell them. That land was what Vane wanted. Rose knew this because Will had figured it out 7 months ago. Will Donahue, Deputy U.S. Marshal, Socorro County, 31 years old, 6 feet tall, sandy hair, a laugh that started in his chest and worked its way up slow. He had been the steadiest person Rose had ever known. Steady in the way that good men are steady, not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger than fear. Purpose, maybe. The conviction that the work was worth doing. He had been dead since March. They had told her it was a fall from his horse. Found him on the road between Socorro and Cassidy Flats on a Thursday morning, horse standing nearby, Will face down in the dirt with no witnesses and no explanation. A fall from his horse. Will Donahue, who had ridden since he was 3 years old, who could sleep in the saddle, who had once stayed on a spooked Mustang for 4 minutes in a thunderstorm just to prove he could. A fall from his horse. Rose had not believed it for a single second. She had come to Cassidy Flats because the last entry in Will's official report, the report she had asked his commanding officer to show her, using the kind of quiet insistence that eventually gets what it asks for, mentioned this town by name. A deed discrepancy, a land survey that didn't match public records, names she didn't recognize. She had come to find out what he knew, and why someone had decided he knew too much. The trouble with living quietly in a place where you are waiting for something is that the waiting has a weight to it. It sits on your shoulders in the morning. It follows you through the school day. It watches you grade papers in the lamplight while your tea goes cold. It makes you careful in ways that look like politeness and precise in ways that look like habit and distant in ways that look like grief. Which, to be fair, was also just grief. Both things at once. A woman can be a widow and a hunter at the same time. These are not mutually exclusive conditions. Rose knew this, the way she knew how to throw a knife and how to explain the concept of fractions to a 9-year-old. They were skills she had acquired at different points in her life for different reasons, and now she used them both. She grieved Will every morning at 4:30, when she walked the dry creek bed and the desert was dark and cold and she could feel the absence of him without anyone watching her feel it. She hunted Edmund Vane every other waking hour, not yet with action, still with observation. She was patient, in the way her father had taught her to be patient, the way a good hunter is patient, not passive but purposeful, moving toward the moment of action at exactly the right speed, neither slow nor fast, but precisely calibrated. 6 months of watching, 6 months of listening, 6 months of teaching children to read while she read everything she could about Edmund Vane. It was Ida who gave her the most, not intentionally. Ida wasn't careless with information, but Ida had lived in Cassidy Flats for 13 years, and she had opinions about the town's recent direction. And opinions, if you simply listen long enough, have a way of becoming information. Over breakfast, over supper, in the moments between. 3 families sold their land last spring, Ida said one evening in September, setting a plate of beans and salt pork in front of Rose without ceremony. The Ellison family, the Taggart brothers, old Pete Cousins and his wife. Rose looked up from the book she wasn't really reading. Sold willingly. Ida's mouth tightened. Willingly is one word. What's another? Tired, Ida said. When a man in a nice suit comes to your door 3 times in a month and smiles at your children and reminds you that times are hard and he's offering good money, and wouldn't it be nice to start fresh somewhere new, eventually willing and tired, look about the same. Rose thought about that. Where did they go? Ellison's went to Albuquerque, last I heard. Ida sat down across from her with her own plate. Taggart's, nobody knows. Pete Cousins and his wife got on a stage in June and I haven't heard a word since. A stage in June, gone. 3 families who had sold their land to Edmund Vane and then ceased for all practical purposes. We find a bubble. And the Marshalls? Rose asked. She made it sound like an idle question. Ida looked at her. The Marshalls don't come to Cassidy Flats much anymore, she said. Used to be. Young one used to come through regular. Will something or other. Donahue. Rose's hands were perfectly still on the tabletop. I remember him, she said. Seemed like a good man, Ida said. Heard he died in the spring. Accident. Yes, Rose said. That's what they said. Ida looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she looked down at her plate. Pass the salt, she said. Rose passed the salt. They ate without speaking, which suited both of them. Edmund Vane called the town meeting on a Tuesday. Third week of October, the notice went up on the general store door and the saloon door, and the post that served as a community board outside the sheriff's office. A simple notice, handwritten in Vane's precise, even penmanship. Town meeting Tuesday evening. The Gilded Spur, Mr. Edmund Vane, requests the attendance of all landholders to discuss an opportunity of mutual benefit to the community. Refreshments provided. Rose read it twice, then once more. Mutual benefit. She had heard that phrase before, in a different context, from a different man, but the cadence of it was the same the way certain men in certain positions learned to frame acquisition as generosity, to dress their wanting in the language of community and opportunity and mutual benefit, until the people being acquired couldn't quite find the word for what was happening to them. She went to the meeting. She arrived early and took a chair against the back wall, slightly to the left of center, with a clear line of sight to the front door, the bar, and the back exit behind the bar. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. The room filled. Most of the town came. That was the thing about small towns. The social gravity of any announced gathering was hard to resist, particularly when the gathering promised both information and free whiskey. Edmund Vane stood at the front of the room, like a man who had been standing at the fronts of rooms his entire life, and found it entirely natural. He was 55, not tall but substantial, with silver hair swept back from a broad forehead and a suit that had been cut in a city Santa Fe, at least, possibly Denver. His boots were clean. His watch chain was gold. His smile arrived before he opened his mouth, like an advance party sent ahead of the main force. Sheriff Olin Pruitt stood beside him, not quite next to him, more like adjacent to him. The way a man stands when he is not entirely comfortable with his position, but has decided, on balance, that standing there is less complicated than not standing there. Pruitt was 51, gray-bearded, with the permanent squint of a man who has spent decades looking at bright things outdoors. He was not, Rose had concluded over 6 months of observation, a bad man. He was a careful man. A man with a house and a wife and 2 children and a practical understanding of what happened to careful men in small towns when they chose the wrong side of a disagreement with the wrong people. She did not hold it against him. Not yet. Friends Vane began, and the room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet for men who have learned how to use silence. I want to talk about the future of Cassidy Flats. He talked for 20 minutes. Rose listened to all of it, while appearing to study her hands. The future. The railroad, the opportunity that the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway's expansion represented for the region, the value of land along the projected route, the wisdom of acting now, before speculation drove prices and complications arose, the fair market price he was prepared to offer to any landholder willing to sell, the bright prospects for those who took this opportunity, the unfortunate uncertainty facing those who waited too long. He never said anything explicitly threatening. He never had to. The threat was architectural. It was built into the structure of every sentence. The way a house is built around its load-bearing walls, you can't see them from outside, but they are holding everything up. Afterward, men lined up to talk to him. Some asked questions. Some nodded in the particular way that men nod when they have already made a decision and are looking for permission to act on it. A few looked worried and said little. Rose did not line up. She sat with her hands folded and watched Vane work the room and filed away everything she saw. The way he touched each man's arm when he spoke to him. The way he moved closer, imperceptibly, into their personal space, so they were the ones who felt they had stepped into his gravity. The way he introduced Pruitt to men who already knew Pruitt, making the sheriff part of the performance without Pruitt, seeming to notice he was performing. And in the corner of the room, nursing a beer, and watching the same room Rose was watching from a different angle. A man she hadn't paid enough attention to before. Big, maybe 40 years old. A face that had been rearranged at some point, a nose broken and reset imperfectly, a scar along the jawline that had healed white and smooth. He wore his gun low, tied down with a strip of leather, which was the sign of someone who had made a professional assessment of the trade-off between fashion and speed. Cutter Broom. She had heard the name from Ida 3 weeks ago. Vane's head of security was the polite description. The man Vane sent to solve problems that needed solving in ways that didn't involve lawyers or judges or the filing of paperwork. Rose had not had occasion to study him closely until now. He was studying the room the same way she was, and then, for just a moment, he was studying her. Their eyes met across the length of the barroom. Rose did not look away, neither did he. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds before Broom's gaze moved on, unhurried, to the next thing. She catalogued that. A man like Cutter Broom looks at every person in a room the same way, assessing, filing, moving on. His gaze had rested on her the same amount of time it rested on the blacksmith, on old Pete Langford from the feed store, on the 2 ranch hands leaning against the bar. Or it had appeared to. Rose wasn't certain. She was very rarely uncertain about things she had directly observed. That uncertainty was itself a piece of information. She did not sign anything. That was the first thing Vane noticed. Not immediately. The meeting ended, and people filtered out in small clusters. And Rose slipped out with the first cluster and walked home through the cool October night, thinking about railroad routes and land surveys, and the specific weight of Will's name when Ida had said it over supper. But Vane noticed eventually. She knew this, because 4 days after the meeting, a man from Vane's office came to the schoolhouse in the afternoon and presented Rose with a formal letter. Very polite, very precise, reminding her that she was renting the property she occupied from a man named Henderson Trace, who had sold his holdings to Mr. Edmund Vane in June, and that her rental arrangement was therefore under review, and that Mr. Vane would appreciate an opportunity to discuss the matter at her earliest convenience. Rose read the letter. She read it again. She wrote a very short, very polite reply, noting that her rental agreement was a legal contract for the duration of the school term, signed before Mr. Vane's acquisition of the property, and therefore not subject to unilateral review. She sent the letter back with Vane's man. Then she sat very still in the empty schoolhouse for about 3 minutes, listening to the wind against the windows. Will had known something about this town, about this land, about Edmund Vane. Will was dead, and she had just, in the politest possible terms, told Edmund Vane that she was not going anywhere. 3 days passed. Then Cutter Broom came. He came in the morning. Rose was in the schoolhouse with the children. Thursday, late October. A white sky day with a cold edge in the wind that said winter was not far behind it. She was at the chalkboard working through a reading exercise with the younger students when the sound of horses stopped outside. Not one horse. Several. She did not turn from the chalkboard immediately. She finished the sentence. She asked Tommy Sutherland to read it back. She listened to him, sound out the words with the labored effort of a child who is almost there and knows he's almost there, and is furious that he's not there yet. Good, she said, again. Through the window she could see, without looking directly at it, 4 horses at the rail outside, 5 men, counting the one already on foot walking toward the schoolhouse door. Cutter Broom opened the door without knocking. He filled the doorway the way big men fill doorways not quite fitting, forced to angle slightly, which he did without acknowledging it. His eyes swept the room once. The children, the chalkboard. Rose standing at the chalkboard with a piece of chalk in her right hand. "Miss Calloway," he said. Mr. Vane would like a word. Rose turned to face him slowly. Behind her, 14 children had gone completely silent. Mr. Vane knows where to find me, she said. I'm in the middle of a lesson. Broom looked at her with the particular flat patience of a man who has delivered many such messages and has learned that patience is faster than argument. He'd prefer today, Broom said. I teach until 3 o'clock, Rose said. He's welcome after that. A beat. It's not really a request, ma'am. The chalk was still in her hand. She looked down at it for a moment. Then she set it in the tray at the base of the chalkboard with a small, precise click. Children, she said. Without turning around, copy the sentences on the board into your primer. I'll be back shortly. She walked to the door. Broom stepped back, not quickly, but enough. She walked past him into the morning light. Outside, 4 more men on horseback spread loosely in a rough semicircle around the front of the schoolhouse. A 5th man, young, maybe 22, with a narrow face and new boots that didn't fit right yet, standing by the horses. Dex Wills, she would learn later, the newest of Vane's hired hands. Still wearing the shine of a life he hadn't quite gotten dirt on yet. She noted him, filed him away. Broom came out behind her and moved to her right, stopping about 6 feet away. Mr. Vane's message is simple, he said. You sign the deed transfer today, and he'll make sure your rental payments are refunded through the end of the year. You don't sign, and the schoolhouse rental contract gets reviewed by his lawyer. Rose clasped her hands in front of her. His lawyer, she said. That's right, and the contract is legal. Lawyers have a way of finding things. She looked at Broom. Is that all? He looked back at her with those flat, assessing eyes. For now. Then I'll think about it, she said. She turned and walked back into the schoolhouse. The children were very quiet when she came back in. She picked up the chalk. Who wants to read next? She said. Nobody moved. Tommy, she said. Read me the second sentence. Tommy Sutherland read the second sentence, slowly, getting every word. His voice only shook a little at the beginning. Very good, Rose said, again. She thought about it for 3 days. Not about signing. She was never going to sign. She thought about timing, about the specific nature of what she was up against, about what Vane would do next, and how fast and what shape it would take. She thought about Will. She thought about the fact that she had come here with a purpose. And the purpose was close enough that she could feel it the way you feel a change in weather. Before you can see it, a pressure, a quality of the air, something molecular. She thought about the letter she had found in Will's saddlebag after he died, the one she had taken before his commanding officer could inventory it. A single, folded page in Will's handwriting, half a letter, never finished. Rose, if you're reading this, then something happened. I don't want to say what I think happened, because I don't want to put it on paper. What I will say is this. There's a man in Socorro County running a scheme with railroad land. I found the beginning of it. I haven't found the end. There's a name that keeps coming up, someone who was involved 15 years back in a killing near this area. I can't prove it yet, but the name is one you know. Come find me, and I'll tell you in person. It ended there. He had never finished it. He had never sent it, and he had never told her in person. The name she would know. She had turned that phrase over every day for 7 months. A name she would know, not a stranger's name. Someone she knew, someone from her life. There were not many people in Rose Calloway's life. Her father had been one of them. She had filed that thought in a very particular place in her mind, in a drawer she only opened when she was ready to look at what was inside it. She wasn't ready yet. She kept it closed. On the 4th day, Cutter Broom came back. This time he didn't come to the schoolhouse. He came to the middle of Main Street, with 4 men behind him, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday when the light was going gold, and there were enough people out on the street to constitute an audience. That was deliberate. Rose understood immediately that it was deliberate. She was walking back from the schoolhouse. She saw them from a block away, and she registered the arrangement, the positioning, the numbers, the choice of location, and she understood what was about to happen with the calm clarity of someone who has spent a great deal of time thinking about how things go wrong and in what sequence. She kept walking, because she was not going to let what was about to happen somewhere private. If it was going to happen at all, it was going to happen exactly where they had chosen to put it, in the open, in front of everyone. Good, she thought. Witnesses. Miss Calloway, Broom said when she reached them. He was standing in the center of the road with 2 men on his left and 2 on his right, not quite blocking her path, close enough to require a decision. Rose stopped. "Mr. Broom," she said. He held up a document, folded once, heavy paper, the kind that had been prepared by someone with access to a good press and expensive ink. "Deed transfer," he said. "Mr. Vane's final offer." She looked at the paper, then at him. "I gave you my answer." Mr. Vane's reconsidered the timeline. Broom said he kept his voice pleasant. He was good at pleasant. He'd prefer this resolve today. Around them, the street had gone quiet. The way streets go quiet when people sense a thing is happening and they are trying to decide whether to walk toward it or away from it. Most of them, Rose noticed in her peripheral vision, had stopped walking. Nobody walked toward it. Nobody said a word. "I see," she said. Broom nodded to his right. One of the men, a thick-necked, red-faced man with the specific look of someone who genuinely enjoys this part of the work, stepped forward with a folded paper of his own. He held it out. Rose reached for it. He pulled it back and tore it. Her rental agreement. Just tore it. The pieces fell in the October dust. "Property reverts to current ownership upon breach." Broom said. "Mr. Vane's lawyer confirmed this morning. You've got until sundown to clear your things out of the schoolhouse." He said it to the street as much as to her. To the 30-odd people standing frozen on both sides of the road. The blacksmith with his hammer in his hand. Ida Marsh standing in the boarding house doorway with a dish rag. Tommy Sutherland's father, red in the face, not moving. Sheriff Pruitt visible at the far end of the street, also not moving. Then the red-faced man produced a bucket. Rose had not seen where it came from. He stepped forward and upended it over her. Not water, mud. The particular thick rust-red mud of the Socorro River bottom, cold and heavy and smelling of iron and rot. It hit her from shoulder to hem. Her dress, her hands, her shoes, the edge of her bonnet. She stood in the street and let it happen, because she was counting, and she was measuring, and she was memorizing. Broom's position relative to his men. The red-faced man's dominant hand and his body weight. The young one, Dex Wills, standing to the far left with his hands in a complicated position that told Rose he didn't entirely want to be here. The angle of the light. The distance between herself and the nearest cover. The position of every person on the street. "Sundown," Broom said. "Ma'am." The men laughed, all of them except the young one. Rose looked down at herself. Then she looked up. She found Broom's eyes and she held them and she said, in a voice that was perfectly level and carried absolutely no emotion whatsoever, "Sundown." Understood. She walked back to the boarding house. She did not hurry. She went upstairs. She cleaned herself with a basin of water and a cloth. She put on fresh clothes, practical dark dress. Nothing she would mind getting dirty again. She combed her hair and put it back. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman in the mirror had green eyes, and a steady expression, and a small callus on the inside of her right thumb. Not a widow, not a schoolteacher, not just. She reached under the mattress. The Colt Single Action Army. 45 was exactly where she had put it 6 months ago. She had cleaned it last on Sunday. She had loaded it with 6 rounds of 45 Colt cartridges last on Sunday. She checked the cylinder, now a habit, not a necessity, because she already knew it was loaded. But the check was the check, and the check was part of the ritual, and the ritual was part of the preparation. The preparation that made the last 3 seconds possible. She thought about her father. She thought about the way he had looked at her when she was 8 years old, sitting in the Texas dust, and she'd fired her first perfect shot, not just close, but perfect, dead center at 40 yards, and he hadn't clapped or praised her or made any noise at all. He had simply looked at her with an expression she hadn't fully understood then. She understood it now. It was the look of a man seeing something he had created and feeling, simultaneously, proud and sorry. She put the Colt in the holster under her dress. She picked up the Winchester from the bottom of the steamer trunk, her father's model 1873, the one he had left behind when he disappeared, the one she had kept for 6 years in a trunk, under various beds, in various rented rooms in various places she had passed through, looking for a version of her life that didn't require her to know how to use it. She put the Winchester down again. Not today. Today was close work. She went downstairs. Ida Marsh was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had clearly not gone back to doing whatever she had been doing. She was standing there with the dish rag still in her hand, and an expression on her face that Rose could not entirely read. "Rose," she said. "I'll be back," Rose said. "I'll have supper ready," Ida said, after a moment. "Be careful." It was not the kind of careful that meant don't hurt yourself. It was the kind of careful that acknowledged something that couldn't quite be acknowledged directly. "Thank you, Ida," Rose said. She walked out the front door. The sun was 3 fingers above the western horizon. Not sundown, not yet, but close enough that the light had turned the particular color of old copper that it turns in the New Mexico territory in late October, deep and golden, and somehow both warm and cold at the same time. Rose Calloway walked down the center of Main Street, unhurried, the way her father had taught her to walk toward a thing. Not fast, which announces nervousness. Not slow, which announces performance. Just the pace of a person who knows exactly where they are going and has no particular feelings about arriving there. She stopped in the center of the street. She waited. She did not have to wait long. Cutter Broom and his men were at the far end of the street. They had been, apparently, celebrating something at the Gilded Spur. They came out into the copper-colored afternoon, and Broom saw her standing there and stopped. His men fanned out instinctively. Professionals do that. It's not an instruction, it's a reflex. "Still here," Broom said. He was far enough away that he had to project slightly to be heard. "Thought I was clear about sundown." "You were clear," Rose said. "I came to return the message." The red-faced man, the one with the bucket, laughed, said something to the man beside him. Broom walked toward her. His men came with him. They stopped about 15 feet away. Broom alone came closer, stopping at 10 feet. He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Later, Rose would think about that moment. She would wonder if he had seen it, then had recognized, in the way certain professionals recognize each other, something in the way she was standing, the weight distribution, the position of her right hand, the particular quality of stillness. If he did recognize it, he did not say so. "Last chance," he said, quietly. "Not a performance now, just the two of them." "I know," Rose said, "a beat." "You sure about this?" he said, which was a strange thing for him to say, which she would also think about later. "I'm sure," she said. Broom took a half step back. The red-faced man's hand moved toward his holster. Rose was already moving, elbow back, wrist forward, the weight of the Colt coming to her hand, with the specific gravity of something that belongs there, the way a key belongs in the right lock and nowhere else. The motion was not fast because she was trying to be fast. The motion was fast because it was simply the result of 10,000 repetitions, compressed into a single fluid instant that bypassed thought entirely. The red-faced man had his gun almost level when her first shot hit him. Right shoulder. He dropped. The second man had a fraction of a second more, and used it wrong. He went for distance instead of cover, stepped back, which meant he was still upright and exposed when she turned and fired. Right shoulder. He dropped. The Colt was back at her side before the second man hit the ground. 2 seconds, if that. The street was absolutely silent. The remaining men stood frozen. The whole town, it seemed, stood frozen. The blacksmith, Ida in the doorway, Tommy Sutherland's father with his mouth open, Sheriff Pruitt at the far end of the street, very still. Dex Wills had his hand near his gun, and his face was the face of someone who has discovered that the situation he agreed to be part of is a fundamentally different situation than the one he was told he was agreeing to be part of. He did not draw. Nobody drew. Rose looked at Cutter Broom. He was looking at her. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something when every assumption he came in with has just been revised simultaneously. Not fear, exactly. Something more complex than fear. Something that involved calculation, and something that involved recognition, and something that she could not name. "Ride back to Vane," she said. Her voice was steady, quiet, not loud enough to be performing to the street, just the right volume for the distance between them. "Tell him sundown came and went." Broom did not move for a long moment. Then he said something she did not expect. He said quietly, so quietly that she almost wasn't certain she heard it correctly, 2 words. "Frank's daughter." Not a question, a recognition. He held her gaze for 3 seconds more. Then he turned and walked to his horse without looking back. The remaining men, after a confused moment, followed him. The 2 injured men were helped up, groaning, by the young one, Dex Wills, who appeared to be the only person present who had the presence of mind to move. They rode south. Rose stood in the middle of the street and watched them go. The smell of gun smoke moved through the October air and dispersed. The blacksmith was the first one to move. He walked slowly back to his shop without saying anything. Then others moved. A few people drifted toward the two men on the ground to see how badly they were hurt. Not badly. She had been precise. Rose holstered the Colt. She stood in the street for another moment. Frank's daughter. Cutter Broom had looked at her and said Frank's daughter like a man saying a name he already knew. Not like a guess, like a file being opened. She had not confirmed it, had not denied it, but he knew. And she turned this over carefully in her mind as she walked back toward the boarding house. He had not reported it to Vane before today. She had been in Cassidy Flats for 6 months. If Broom had known or suspected from the beginning, Vane would have moved against her long before a town meeting and a bucket of mud. So either Broom had just figured it out, or he had known, and chosen not to tell Vane. Both of those possibilities required further thought. That night, someone slid a piece of paper under her door. She heard it. She was sitting at the small desk by the window, lamp low, looking at the partial letter Will had written. She had read it so many times she could recite it without looking. She crossed the room and picked up the paper, a single folded sheet. On it, in a careful, deliberate handwriting that she did not recognize, "He knows what you are. That is not your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is what your husband knew. And who else knew that your father was the one who helped bury it?" She read it twice. Then she held it over the lamp flame and watched it burn. Frank's daughter. Your father was the one who helped bury it. She sat back down at the desk, opened her notebook, wrote a name. Not Vane's name. She already had Vane's name. A different name. A name she had been keeping in a drawer in her mind, unexamined for 7 months. Frank Calloway. She looked at it for a long time. Then she underlined it once. Not with anger, not with grief, with the particular precision of a woman who has just confirmed that she is finally, after 6 months of patience, approaching the actual shape of the thing she came here to find. The schoolteacher of Cassidy Flats sat in the lamplight, with a name underlined in her notebook, and the smell of gun smoke still faint in the night air outside her window, and she understood with the cold, clear certainty that comes only when you have been preparing for a thing long enough that the easy part was over. The morning after the shooting, Cassidy Flats did not know what to do with itself, which was understandable. Small towns have a rhythm, a predictable, reliable, slightly boring rhythm that most of their inhabitants complain about and secretly depend on completely. The blacksmith opens at 7, the general store at 7:30, the saloon at 11 because Hap Greer, who runs it, has a policy about not drinking before noon that he extends, as a courtesy, to his customers. Sheriff Pruitt makes his morning round at 8, stops for coffee at the boarding house at 8:40, goes back to the office at 9:15. Rhythm, pattern, the reliable machinery of a place that knows what it is. 2 men shot in the street by a schoolteacher, in a mud-stained dress, did not fit the rhythm. Rose Calloway was at the chalkboard by 8 o'clock. 14 children filed in and took their seats with the subdued, wide-eyed quality of people who have been told by their parents both to behave normally and not to ask questions, which is an instruction set that produces, in children, a very specific kind of vibrating silence. She wrote the day's sentences on the board. She called on Tommy Sutherland first, because Tommy's father had been one of the people standing on the street yesterday. And Tommy needed to know that everything in this room was exactly the same as it had always been. Tommy read the sentence, slowly, getting every word. "Good," Rose said again. Outside Cassidy Flats processed. The 2 men she had shot, the red-faced one, whose name was Bart Healy, and the other one whose name nobody seemed certain of had been seen to by Doc Graber, patched up, and were currently at the Gilded Spur, drinking what Hap Greer described as medicinal whiskey. Right shoulders, both of them. No permanent damage that Doc Graber could identify, though Healy would have trouble lifting his arm above shoulder height for 6 weeks, which was, if you were being precise about it, entirely intentional. She had not been trying to kill them. If she had been trying to kill them, they would be dead. This was the piece of information that Cassidy Flats was currently turning over in its collective mind, with the fascinated unease of a person who has found something strange and beautiful and slightly alarming and cannot decide whether to pick it up or step back from it. A widow, a schoolteacher, 5 feet 3 inches of a woman who weighed maybe 110 pounds. 2 shots, 1.5 seconds. Both men down before either of them cleared leather. Sheriff Pruitt did not come for his morning coffee at 8:40. He came at 9:15, sat down across from Ida Marsh's kitchen table, accepted the coffee Ida set in front of him. Looked at it for a moment. "She's still here," he said. "Teaching," Ida said. Pruitt nodded slowly. He wrapped both hands around the mug. "Vane's going to come back at her harder." "Probably. I can't." He stopped. Started again. "Ida, I've got a wife and 2 boys. I know you do. I'm not in a position to Olin." Ida sat down across from him, looked at him directly. "I didn't ask you to be." He looked up. "I'm just telling you she's still here," Ida said. "Drink your coffee." He drank his coffee. He left at 9:50. He walked back to his office. He sat at his desk and looked at the wall. He was a careful man in an impossible position, and he knew it. He stayed at his desk. Rose stayed at the schoolhouse until 3 o'clock. Lesson. Recess. Lesson. She watched Tommy Sutherland figure out a long division problem on the board. With the concentrated fury of a child who has decided that mathematics is a personal enemy and he is going to defeat it through sheer determination. He got it. Not perfectly. Close enough. "Good," she said. He sat down with the suppressed pride of someone who doesn't want to appear too pleased with themselves. At 3 o'clock she dismissed them, watched them file out into the afternoon, stood in the doorway until the last one had rounded the corner. Then she went inside, sat at her desk, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of being precisely as exhausted as she actually was. 5 minutes. No more, because there was work to do. The thing about Edmund Vane was that he was careful. Careful men leave tracks. Not the obvious tracks, not dropped evidence, not loose talk in saloons, not the kind of careless arrogance that brings men like Vane down in dime novels and not very often in real life. The tracks careful men leave are in the gaps, in the negative space, in the things that should be there and aren't, the document that should exist and doesn't, the record that was filed and then quietly wasn't, the name that appears once in a public record and then in all subsequent records is absent. Will had known how to read those tracks. He had been good at it, patient, methodical, the kind of investigative work that doesn't make for exciting stories but makes for convictions when it's done right and when the people doing it survive long enough to finish. He hadn't survived long enough, but he had left notes. Rose had found the journal 10 days after arriving in Cassidy Flats, on a day when the family renting the house Will had used as his temporary base of operations was away. She had gone in through the back window with a skill that would have surprised most people, and would not have surprised her father at all. She had spent 40 minutes going through the house systematically. The journal was under a floorboard in the bedroom, 3rd board from the east wall. Slightly proud of the floor, the nail had been pulled and replaced carefully, but the wood had swollen slightly, and the board sat a hair's breadth higher than its neighbors. Will had shown her that trick himself. He hadn't anticipated she would use it to find his hiding places after he was gone. Or maybe he had. She had taken the journal, returned through the window, walked home in the dark, sat up until 2 in the morning reading it by lamplight, with her tea going cold beside her, and then she had put it away. Because she wasn't ready, because some of what was in it required things to be in place before she could act on it, and some of what was in it she needed to sit with for a while, before she could look at it directly. Now, sitting in the empty schoolhouse in the October afternoon, she unlocked the steamer trunk and lifted out the journal again. Will's handwriting was small and precise, the product of a man who had learned to write in a one-room schoolhouse in Missouri and had never forgotten his teacher's insistence on legibility. Each letter formed completely, each word spaced evenly. Even when the content of what he was writing was urgent or disturbing, the handwriting stayed calm. She had always loved that about him, the steadiness. She turned to the section she had read most, the middle section, the pages where the investigation stopped being about land surveys and became something else entirely. September 14, 1883, Socorro. Spent the morning with the county land records. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe survey. From the spring places, the projected route through the western portion of Socorro County, through what is currently agricultural and grazing land, held by maybe 30 families. Value before the survey, negligible. Value after, If the railroad builds through here, substantial. Someone knew about this survey before it was made public. The earliest vein land acquisition in this county that I can find is dated March of this year, 6 weeks before the survey results were released. He acquired 4 parcels in the projected path for prices suggesting the sellers had no idea what they were sitting on. This is not unusual. Speculation on railroad routes happens. Men with connections to railroad boards make their money this way, and it is not always illegal. But 3 of those 4 early acquisitions involved sellers who have since become unreachable. And the 4th was purchased from a man named Gideon Raft, who signed the deed on a Tuesday and was found dead on a Thursday. Coroner said heart failure. Raft was 43. Rose had read that passage many times. She read it again now. Gideon Raft, 43. Heart failure. She thought about the Ellison family, the Taggart brothers. Pete Cousins and his wife on a stage in June, not heard from since. Careful men. Careful men make problems disappear. She turned forward in the journal. October 3, 1883. I have been looking into the 1878 killing near Socorro that was never solved, the one that territorial records list as unknown assailant, victim, Chester Hollis, surveyor. Hollis was working for a private geological firm out of Denver. His survey work in this area predates the Atchison-Topeka survey by 5 years. If Hollis found what I think he found, evidence of the route viability and the land values, then someone had reason to make sure his findings never reached his employer. His findings never reached his employer. Hollis's body was found off the road between Socorro and the Magdalena Range, shot once, rifle shot from distance. Clean work. Nobody saw anything. Nobody was ever charged. I have been trying to identify who was working this area as a hired gun in 1878. It is not easy. Men in that profession do not advertise. But there is a name that has come up twice now in conversations with men who were in this territory at that time. A man known for distance work. Quiet. Reliable. Never missed. The name is Frank Calloway. Rose closed the journal, set it on the desk, sat very still. Outside, the wind moved through the gap in the fence where the church had never been built. A horse somewhere on the south end of town. The distant sound of the blacksmith, back to work. Frank Calloway, written in Will's handwriting, in Will's journal, in the investigation that had gotten Will killed. Her father's name. She had known it was in there. She had read it before. The first time she'd read it, sitting up at 2 a.m. 6 months ago. She had put the journal down and sat with her hands flat on the table for a very long time. She had known. She had put it in the drawer. She had not been ready to take it out. She took it out now. Frank Calloway, her father, who had taught her everything she knew about patience and accuracy and the specific weight of a decision you could not take back, who had ridden away in the night when she was 10 years old and never come back, and was supposed to be dead, and was apparently not dead. Because Cutter Broom had said Frank's daughter in the street yesterday with the ease of a man identifying something he already knew. Frank Calloway, who had apparently been in New Mexico Territory in 1878, doing work for hire for a man who turned out to be Edmund Vane, who had shot a surveyor named Chester Hollis, who had helped bury the evidence of what this land was worth, and Will, her husband, Will Donahue, who had been patient and methodical and good. Will, who had followed the tracks that careful men leave in the gaps and the negative space and the missing records. Will had found her father's name, and someone had killed Will before he could finish following those tracks to their end. She opened the journal again, turned to the last entry. March 2, 1884. I am going to Cassidy Flats tomorrow. There is a family there, the Taggarts, who sold to Vane last spring, and I want to speak to them before they go any further. I am also carrying something I should have sent already. A letter to Rose. I keep starting it and not finishing it, because every time I start to write down what I know, I think about what it means for her to know it, and I stop. But she should know. She is the most capable person I have ever met, and I love her more than I know how to say in writing, and she deserves the truth. I'll tell her when I get back. I'll tell her in person. The name I need to tell her is the entry ended there, mid-sentence. He had left the next morning for Cassidy Flats, and he had not come back. Rose put her thumb on the unfinished sentence and held it there for a moment. The ink of the dash at the end, the line that went nowhere. She would give anything to know what came after that dash. She was also fairly certain now that she knew. She put the journal away, locked the trunk, stood up. There was a second thing she needed to do today, and she had been putting it off because doing it required going somewhere she had not yet gone and asking for something she had not yet asked for. It required a degree of deliberate exposure that she had been avoiding for 6 months, because exposure, in her experience, was how things went wrong. But things were already going wrong, which changed the calculation. Edmund Vane's bank was on the east side of Main Street, third building from the corner. She went at 5 o'clock, half an hour before closing. The young man at the front desk looked up when she came in with the expression of someone encountering a situation for which his training had not prepared him. He was maybe 20 years old, with slicked hair and a collar too tight for his neck, and he looked at Rose Calloway the way you look at something when you are not entirely sure if you should be afraid of it. "I'd like to review a property record," she said pleasantly. "Ma'am," he said, then stopped. "A property record," she repeated, "for a parcel I understand was recently transferred. I have a legal interest in the matter." He looked at her, looked at the door behind him that led to the back offices, looked at her again. She smiled at him. It was a mild, teacher-like smile that communicated absolute confidence that this was a normal thing to be asking for, and there was no particular reason to be concerned. He went through the door. He came back. "Mr. Vane isn't in," he said. "I don't need Mr. Vane," Rose said. "I need the public property records. Those are available to any citizen by right under territorial law." The young man opened his mouth, closed it. She was right, and he knew she was right, and he did not have the authority to argue with someone who was right about a legal matter. He showed her to a small room off the side of the main office. File cabinets, a table, a lamp. "Take as long as you need," he said with the tone of a man who deeply hoped she would not take very long at all. She took 40 minutes. The records were organized well, too well, actually. There was something in the precision of the filing that felt performative. The kind of careful organization that is designed to be seen and to communicate legitimacy, like a man who dresses very well because he wants you to notice that he dresses very well. She found the Taggart deed transfer first, dated April 14, 1883. Price paid, $420 for 90 acres. $420 for 90 acres in a county where the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad was projected to run, where land values, once the route was confirmed, would be several times that per acre. The Taggarts had not known what they were selling, or they had been in no position to hold out for what it was worth. She found the Ellison deed, the Cousins deed, 3 others she hadn't heard Ida mention, families who had sold in the 18 months since Vane had established his presence in Socorro County. She noted the names, the prices, the dates. Then she found what she was actually looking for. Not in the deed records, in the survey records, which were filed in the same cabinet, because Vane's operation apparently had absorbed the function of the county surveyor's office, which was the kind of administrative consolidation that was either very efficient or very concerning, depending on who was doing the consolidating. A geological survey, commissioned in 1882, survey company out of Albuquerque. The findings, subsurface rock composition consistent with mineral deposits of significant potential value along the western corridor of the county. Potential value, mineral deposits. The railroad wanted this land because a railroad line would pass through it. Vane wanted this land because a railroad line would pass through it, and because there was something under it that was worth considerably more than the land on top of it. And Vane had known both of those things before anyone else in Socorro County had known either of them. She turned the survey over. On the back, in pencil, barely legible, a notation, not in the surveyor's handwriting, a different hand, 3 words and a set of initials. Per prior arrangement, E.V. She stared at that notation for a long moment. Per prior arrangement, this survey had been conducted not to discover what was here. It had been conducted to confirm what someone had already been told was here. Someone had been here before this survey, had done a prior survey, informal, unofficial, not on the books. Someone like Chester Hollis, who had been shot in 1878, whose findings had never reached his employer. because someone had made sure of that. She memorized the notation, put the survey back exactly where she had found it, straightened the files, turned out the lamp. She went back to the front desk. "Thank you," she said to the young man, who was trying very hard to appear as though he had not been listening through the thin wall. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She walked out into the evening. Cutter Broom was leaning against the wall outside, not aggressively, not blocking her path, just there, arms crossed, looking at the street. She stopped. He didn't look at her immediately. He looked at the street for another moment, then turned his head. Rose put her right hand in a neutral position, not on the gun, not far from it, Miss Calloway, Broom said. "Mr. Broom, a beat. What you did yesterday," he said, Healy and the other one. "What about it? You could have killed them, yes." He looked at her. "Why didn't you?" She looked back. "Because I didn't want to." He considered that, seemed to find it a sufficient answer. He pushed off the wall, standing upright. "Walk with me," he said. She did not move. He noticed. "I'm not carrying a message from Vane," he said. "This is personal. Personal. I got something to say to you." He paused. "You can walk with me, or I can say it here on the street. Your choice." She evaluated him, the set of his shoulders, the position of his hands both visible, neither near his weapon, the angle of his body turned slightly away from her, which was either genuine or the best possible imitation of genuine. She started walking. He walked beside her. Not too close. They walked to the end of the block, turned the corner, moved out of the main street's line of sight. He stopped. She stopped, left space between them. "Your daddy is still alive," Broom said. She kept her face exactly as it was. "I know you know," he said. "I know you know, because you didn't blink when I said it yesterday." "Most people blink when something surprises them," she said. "I was paying attention to other things." He looked at her. "Frank Calloway. You know what he did in 78. Not a question." "I've been doing some research," she said carefully. "Then you know he did it for Vane. I'm working with what I have." Broom was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ground. Something moved across his face, not guilt exactly. Something older than guilt. The specific expression of a man who has lived with a thing for long enough that feeling bad about it has become indistinguishable from just feeling. "Your husband," he said. "Donahue." She said nothing. "He was getting close," Broom said, "to the whole thing. The survey in 78, Hollis, Frank's involvement, all of it. I know. I sent him a warning." Broom said it simply, no performance, no plea for credit. March, 2 days before he rode to Cassidy Flats. Sent word through a man in Socorro. Told him to stop, walk away. Said it wasn't safe. Rose looked at him. He didn't get it in time. No, a beat. No, he didn't. The wind moved between them. An October wind that had picked up something cold from the mountains to the north. "Nuff. Why are you telling me this?" she said. Broom looked at her. "Because I didn't warn him enough. Didn't make it clear enough. And I've been sitting on that since March, and it doesn't get any lighter." He paused. "And because your daddy Frank, he's here. In the territory, Vane has him on a leash. Uses what Frank did in 78 as leverage. Frank can't walk without Vane knowing about it." She absorbed this, carefully, set it next to what she already knew, and looked at the shape the two pieces made together. "Where?" she said. "South, 20 miles. Working a ranch Vane owns under a name he's not born to." Broom paused. "He doesn't know you're here." "I don't think he knows." "Vane hasn't told him. Why not?" Broom's jaw tightened. "Because Vane using Frank against you is better than Frank knowing where you are and having the chance to do something about it. Leverage is worth more when the person being leveraged doesn't know the full picture." She was quiet for a moment. "Your father was a better man than you think," Broom said, and his voice was quieter now, with something in it she hadn't expected. Something that sounded like it came from knowing the man, from actual experience of him, and a worse man than you know. Both things at once. "That's Frank." She looked at him. "You knew him," she said, "before? Worked with him. A long time ago." He said it without elaboration, and she understood that the elaboration wasn't going to come, and she did not push for it. "Frank's daughter," she said, repeating what he'd said yesterday. "You've got his eyes," Broom said, "and his hands, and that way of standing where nothing moves unless you want it to." She looked down at her hands, the callus on her right thumb. "Why aren't you telling Vane any of this?" she said. Broom was quiet for a long moment. "Because I'm done," he said finally. "With this, with him." He said it like a man who has been arriving at a decision for a long time and has only just now heard himself say it out loud. "Been done for a while." Just been too cowardly to stop. She looked at him carefully. That's a large thing to say, she said. Yes, it is, and you're saying it to me. You seem like someone worth saying it to. She evaluated him. I'm not in a position to trust you, she said. I'm not asking you to, he said. I'm just telling you what I know. You do what you want with it. He started to walk away. Broom, she said. He stopped. Dex Wills, she said. The young one. Yesterday, he didn't draw. Broom turned back. Something shifted in his face. Something complicated. No, he said. He didn't. He's not cut out for this. No, Broom said again. He's not. Keep him away from whatever comes next, she said. Broom looked at her for a moment. Then he walked away without another word. She stood in the alley for a moment after he left. Frank Calloway, still alive, on a ranch 20 miles south, on a leash. She had spent 6 years telling herself that her father was dead. Not because she believed it entirely. Because it was simpler. Because the alternative that he was alive and had simply not come back was a particular kind of wound that was easier to leave dressed than to examine. Now she had to examine it. She walked back to the boarding house. She ate supper. She was very quiet. Ida Marsh, who could read a silence the way some people read books, said nothing about it and passed the biscuits. That night she dreamed about Texas. Not a good dream. Not a bad one. Just Texas. The specific quality of Texas light in the late afternoon, that wide-open gold that has nowhere to hide and doesn't try. The smell of dry grass. The sound of her father's boots on the porch boards. She woke up at 4:15, 15 minutes early. She lay still in the dark for a moment. Then she got up. 3 days passed, 3 days of school. 3 days of Cassidy Flats processing its own collective shock at what had happened and settling into a new understanding of the woman who had been teaching their children for 6 months. Not fear, exactly, not entirely. More like recalibration. Tommy Sutherland's father stopped her on the street on the second day, red-faced, broad-shouldered, a man who looked like he'd been made from the same material as the land he worked. He stood in front of her for a moment. Then he said, "Much obliged, ma'am." Nodded once, walked on. She understood what he meant. She nodded back. Sheriff Pruitt crossed paths with her on the third day outside the general store. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has a great deal to say and has decided not to say any of it. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Sheriff," she said. He looked at her for another moment. "You planning on staying?" "I'm planning on finishing what I'm doing," she said. He looked at that answer from several angles. Found it insufficient in ways he couldn't articulate. "Vane's not finished," he said. "I know." He nodded, walked on. She watched him go and thought, he knows more than he's saying. He knows and he's scared and he's trying to figure out which way to fall. She let him think. On the 4th day after the shooting, she went into Vane's bank again. Different time. Early morning, before the town fully woke. She did not use the front door. The back window of the records room was not locked. She had checked it on her first visit. Old habit. She always checked the windows. She was inside in 40 seconds. She worked by feel in the near dark. A small oil lamp turned very low. Her body between the lamp and the window. She knew the cabinet system now. She knew where to look. She was looking for something specific. The contract, not the land deeds. The other contract. The arrangement between Vane and whoever had tipped him off about the railroad route. The paper trail that connected the prior knowledge to a source. Someone inside the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe organization. Someone who had sold route information before it was public. That was the piece Will had not found yet. She looked for 40 minutes. She found something better than what she was looking for. Not the contract itself. A letter, folded, unsealed, sitting in a file labeled with the current month, like it had been put there recently and not yet moved to permanent storage. She opened it. It was addressed to a name she did not know, Alderman Cruz, Santa Fe, and it was signed, at the bottom, with Vane's signature. The body of the letter was businesslike and brief. The matter in Socorro County is proceeding on schedule. The final acquisitions should be completed within the next 30 days, at which point the full transfer package can be presented to a TSF management. I anticipate no further complications. The situation with Deputy Donahue has been resolved, and the replacement the marshals have sent to the county is unlikely to pursue the same lines of inquiry. Please confirm that Judge Harcastle remains available to process the final deeds as we discussed. I understand his cooperation has been secured through the usual arrangement. I expect this to be our most profitable undertaking to date. 3 previous operations have taught us what to anticipate. 3 previous operations. She held the lamp closer and read that line again. 3 previous. Cassidy Flats was the 4th. There had been 3 other towns, 3 other sets of families, 3 other packages of land deeds, probably similarly priced below value, probably similarly transferred to waiting buyers with railroad connections. 3 other operations, which meant 3 other sets of records, which meant the evidence trail was not just here, in this one town, in this one county. It was larger than she had understood. It was much larger. She reread the letter in full, memorized it completely. She had a good memory, trained and practiced, the kind that retains detail with the fidelity of a photograph when it's working properly. Then she replaced the letter exactly as she'd found it, moved to the window, paused. The situation with Deputy Donahue has been resolved. She stood at the window for a moment in the dark. Resolved. Will, reduced to a situation. A complication. A line in a letter to a man in Santa Fe about the business arrangements for a land fraud scheme. She felt something move through her that was not grief and was not anger, and was both. Resolved. She went out the window. She went to the dry creek bed. It was still dark. The desert pre-dawn. The coldest hour. The sky, starting to show a faint gray blue in the east that wasn't quite light yet but was the promise of it. She stood in the creek bed. She drew over and over, not fast at first, slow, working the motion, the mechanics of it, the way her father had taught her when she was 8 years old, and she had complained that slow practice was boring, and he had said, slow practice is how you get fast. You don't practice speed, you practice precision, and the speed follows. She worked the draw until it was right, until it was something her body did without consultation. Then she stopped. She stood in the creek bed, in the pre-dawn cold, and she thought about Will's letter, the one she had in her possession for 7 months. Rose, if you're reading this, then something happened. There's a name that keeps coming up, someone who was involved 15 years back in a killing near this area. I can't prove it yet, but the name is one you know. The name she would know. Frank Calloway. Will had known. He had been writing a letter to tell her, and he had not been able to finish it. He had wanted to tell her in person. He had wanted to sit across from her and look at her face when he said it and be there for the impact of it. He would have known it would be an impact. He had known her long enough to know what her father was to her, what he had been, what it would mean, and he had protected her from it, right up until the moment he couldn't protect her from anything anymore. She pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum. 1 breath, 2. The steadiest person I ever knew, she thought, and he still tried to soften the blow. She stood in the creek bed until the sky was full gray and the first birds started. Then she walked back to the boarding house. The attack came that evening. She had been expecting something. Not necessarily this specifically, but Vane would not leave the street incident without a response, and the response would escalate, because that was how men like Vane operated. They had a sequence, a toolkit, a set of options they moved through in order of increasing force. She had cost him something. The public nature of it, specifically. A man builds his authority in a small town on the certainty of his power. When someone tests that certainty and remains standing, the damage is not just tactical, it's architectural. He would send something harder than cut a broom and a bucket of mud. She was walking back from the schoolhouse, the usual route. Long straight road, open on both sides, the feed store and the tanner's on the left. The dry goods storage, and a gap of open land on the right. The gap of open land. She had thought about that gap before. It was the only real cover on this route. Mesquite bushes. A broken wagon axle someone had dragged off the road years ago. The dry remnant of what might once have been a garden wall. She thought about it every time she walked past it. She thought about it now. She was 30 feet from the gap when she heard the sound. Not a voice, not a footstep, a breathing adjustment. The specific quality of someone who has been very still for a while suddenly not being still. She did not slow down or speed up, she moved left. Not a full step, half a step, enough to put the feed store corner between herself and the gap. The shot came from directly where she had been standing. A rifle, 44 probably. The sound of it cracked across the empty evening street, and then the echo came back from the buildings, and then there was already moving. Not away, toward. She hit the corner of the feed store and used it. took a second to establish where the shot had come from the far end of the gap, near the broken axle, which put the shooter at maybe 40 feet from where she'd been standing. Second shot. It hit the corner above her head. Wood chips. She dropped to one knee. The Winchester was on her back, slung under her coat. She had started carrying it there after the street confrontation. Its weight was familiar, reassuring in the specific way that familiar things are reassuring in unfamiliar situations. She had it off her back and to her shoulder in one motion. Third shot from the gap, wider than the first two, which meant one of two things. Either he was panicking because she wasn't where he expected her to be, or there were two of them and the second one was moving. She processed this in the time it took her to breathe. Two of them. She came around the corner, low and fast. The man by the broken axle had a position she could see he'd committed to it, settling in for what he thought would be a simple ambush, and he hadn't built in an exit for the contingency where the target didn't fall down. She saw his silhouette against the last of the light, prone position, barrel pointed at where she'd been. She put around 2 feet to his left. Not at him, 2 feet left. Next one doesn't miss, she said. Not loud, just loud enough. He froze. The second man, the one who had been moving, came around the right side of the gap, not charging, trying to flank. She heard him before he got there. The sound of boots on hard-packed dirt is different from boots on loose dirt, and she had learned the difference a long time ago. She moved to her left, used the corner again, heard the second man's boots stop, heard the change in his breathing as he tried to figure out where she'd gone. She waited. 7 seconds. He came around the corner looking left. She was 3 feet to his right. The stock of the Winchester, applied with controlled force to his left shoulder, sat him down hard. His gun went wide. He sat in the dirt and looked up at her, young, maybe 25. Not one of the men from the street incident knew. Drop it, she said. He dropped it. Hands. He put his hands up. Both of you, she said, loud enough for the first man to hear. Stand up. Walk south. Keep walking until you reach the edge of town. Then keep walking. She waited. The first man got up. He was shaking. Not from cold. They walked south. She stood in the gap and watched them until they were past the last building and into the open desert. Then she leaned her back against the feed store wall and let herself breathe. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. She was not sure right now if that was a comfort or a sorrow. She told nobody. Not Ida, not Pruitt. What would she say? 2 men tried to kill me and I sent them away. 2 more men to add to Vane's growing collection of bruised and bewildered hired hands. She went home. Ate supper. Listened to Ida talk about the weather coming in from the north and the family that had arrived at the boarding house this afternoon looking for lodging. Nice family, Ida said. Husband, wife, 2 little ones. Passing through from Albuquerque. Where are they headed? West, Arizona Territory. Starting over, they said. Rose thought about that, starting over, the particular courage of it, the particular exhaustion of it. That takes something, she said. It does, Ida said. More biscuits? Please, Rose said. The next morning she made a decision. She had been working from the outside in patient observation, evidence collection, the slow and methodical accumulation of the thing Will had been building when he died. But she was running out of time. Vane had escalated. He would escalate again. The next thing he sent might be better than the 2 men in the gap. Eventually, numbers or luck would create a problem that patience and precision couldn't solve. She needed to move, but she needed one more piece. The journal, the letter from Vane's records room, the geological survey notation. These were pieces of a picture, but they were not the picture. They were enough to interest a careful U.S. Marshal. They were not yet enough to close a net around Edmund Vane without him finding a way through it. She needed the prior arrangement, the person inside the railroad, the source of Vane's advanced knowledge of the route. She needed that name. She went to see Sheriff Pruitt, not to his office, to his house. At 7 in the morning, before he started his rounds, his wife answered the door, a small, round-faced woman named Berta, who looked at Rose with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not quite succeeding. Is he home? Rose said. Berta went inside, came back. He'll be out in a moment. Pruitt came to the door in his suspenders, holding his coffee. They looked at each other. You want to come in? He said. If it's all right. He stepped back. She sat at their kitchen table. The house smelled like coffee and soap, and the particular smell of a house where children live, crayons maybe, and something sweet. Pruitt sat across from her. 2 men tried to kill me last night, she said. He closed his eyes for a second. You're not dead. No. They? Walking south last I saw them. A little worse for wear. He opened his eyes, looked at his coffee. Olin, she said. He looked up. She had not used his name before. I'm not asking you to do anything that puts your family at risk, she said. I'm asking you one question, and I'll get out of your kitchen. He looked at her, a long look, the look of a man trying to find the angle, the catch, the part where this gets bad. Ask, he said. Vane knew about the railroad route before it was public, she said. He had inside information. Someone at Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. Do you know anything about that? Pruitt was quiet, long quiet. Outside, one of his children said something, and Berta's voice answered, low and soothing. There was a man, Pruitt said finally. Came through here in January. Fine suit, Eastern boots. Came to see Vane at the bank. I saw them come out together, laughing. Vane introduced him to me as a business associate. I didn't catch the name. Could you describe him? Maybe 40 years old. Dark hair going gray, tall. Gold watch chain different from Vane's, heavier. He paused. He had a railroad pass in his breast pocket. I could see the corner of it when his coat moved. Rose filed this. That's enough, she said. She stood up. Miss Calloway, Pruitt said. She looked at him. What you're doing, he said. He stopped. Started again. My boys are 7 and 9. I think about what kind of town they're going to grow up in. He paused. I think about it a lot. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. She walked to the door. When you're ready, he said to her back, and when you need something from inside the law, you come to me. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe. Did not turn around. Thank you, Sheriff, she said. She walked out into the morning. The letter came that afternoon. Not slipped under her door this time. Delivered by hand, by a boy she didn't recognize, who ran up to her outside the general store and thrust a folded paper at her and took off running before she could ask him anything. She unfolded it. One line. Your husband knew my name. Now you know it too. Your father sends his regards. No signature. She stood on the street. Her father sends his regards. Frank Calloway, 20 miles south, on a leash, apparently aware that she was here, which meant Vane had told him, had used her presence as leverage, had said, essentially, your daughter is in Cassidy Flats, and if you don't do what I say, something might happen to her in Cassidy Flats. She thought about that. She thought about how it felt from her father's side, to have spent however many years being controlled by a man who held your past crimes over you, and to find out that the same man now also had access to your daughter. What would Frank Calloway do with that information? She thought about the morning she had come downstairs at age 10 and found his coffee cup on the table and his horse gone from the barn. No note, no explanation, just absence. She had told herself for 16 years that he had left to protect them, that he had gotten into something too dangerous, and removing himself was the only way to keep them safe. She had also told herself, on the bad nights, that he had simply left, that she would never know which was true. She still didn't know, but she knew something new now. He was 20 miles south, and he knew she was here, and he had sent regards. She went back to her room, sat at the desk, opened her notebook, wrote 3 words, he is coming. She thought about it for a moment, then she wrote 3 more, so is everything else. She was right about both. On the 6th day after the shooting, the last day of October, she woke at 4:15 to the sound of a horse being walked, very quietly, into the alley behind the boarding house. Not Broom, not Vane's men. She had catalogued their horses by sound and gait over 6 months. The animal in the alley was unknown to her. She was dressed in 30 seconds. She went to the window. In the gray pre-dawn, a man was tying a horse to the fence post at the end of the alley. He moved with the unhurried, deliberate economy of someone who has lived in his own body for a very long time and has a complete understanding of what it can and can't do. Tall once, slightly bent now, silver-haired, wearing a coat that had been good quality once a long time ago. He turned toward the house. She saw his face. She had not seen his face in 16 years. It had changed. Of course it had changed. She had expected it to change. 16 years is a long time, and he'd been living rough for some of it. That much was clear from the set of his shoulders and the cut of his jaw and the particular lean quality of a man who has not had regular meals. But the eyes were the same. Green. Her eyes. Her eyes in a face that was 60 years old and tired in a way that 60 years of just living doesn't produce. Frank Calloway stood in the alley below her window and looked up at the house. Rose stood at the window and looked down at him. A long moment. His expression, as he found her face in the dim window, was not what she had expected. She had expected something. Relief or guilt or the complicated performance of a man who knows he owes an explanation. What she saw was something simpler and somehow harder to look at. Fear, not of her, not of what she might do. Fear for her. She recognized it because she had seen it on Will's face, sometimes when she came home late and he had been waiting. The specific expression of someone who has been imagining, for too long, the ways in which something could go wrong. She pressed her hand flat against the cold glass of the window. He saw the gesture, did not return it, but something shifted in his face. She turned from the window. She put on her coat. She picked up the Colt from the bedside table and then, after a moment, put it back. She went downstairs. She went out the back door. She stood in the alley. They were 10 feet apart. The desert pre-dawn around them. Cold. The horses breathing. The very first gray suggestion of light on the eastern horizon. She looked at her father. He looked at her. "Rosie," he said. His voice was different, rougher, but the way he said her name was exactly the same as it had always been. Like it was a word he'd spent a lot of time saying. Like saying it cost him something. She said nothing. He exhaled, looked at the ground, looked back up. "I know," he said. "I know about Will." "I know you know," she said. "I didn't," he stopped. "Tell me," she said. "Don't manage it. Don't shape it. Tell me," he told her. Frank Calloway talked for a long time, and Rose listened, which was, if you knew either of them, the most extraordinary thing about the whole morning. Frank had never been a man who explained himself. Explanation was, in his view, a form of weakness, the verbal equivalent of leaving your back to the door. And Rose had learned from him to treat silence as information, to read what wasn't said, to find meaning in the gaps. But this morning, in the cold alley behind Ida Marsh's boarding house, with the sky going from gray to pale gold above the rooflines, Frank Calloway talked, and Rose listened, because she needed all of it, every piece. He had come to New Mexico territory in the autumn of 1878. That part she already knew, or suspected. What she hadn't known was the specific shape of the arrangement. Vane had not hired him directly. The introduction had come through a man named Aldous Priest, a fixer, a middleman, the kind of person who exists in every era and every geography as the connective tissue between men with money and men with certain skills. Priest had found Frank in Abilene. Frank was at that point trying to stop. He had been trying to stop for 3 years. He had a daughter in Texas with his sister-in-law. He was sending money when he could. He was taking fewer jobs. But the money Priest offered was enough to get clear, enough to set Rose up with something real, enough to be the last one. It is always the last one. Frank knew that even as he agreed to it, he knew the particular lie of the last one, and he agreed to it anyway. Because desperation and love and the need to believe you can close a door on what you've been, those things together, are stronger than knowledge, stronger than experience. Strong enough to convince an experienced man to do the thing he knows he shouldn't do one more time. Chester Hollis, a surveyor, 41 years old, working for a Denver geological firm, making his way through Socorro County on what he thought was a routine land survey job, carrying in his saddlebags the findings that would eventually make the western corridor of that county worth more than most men would earn in 10 lifetimes. Frank had not known Hollis's name when he took the job. He learned it afterward. He always learned the names afterward. It was a particular form of penance he had developed. He would not look away from what he had done by refusing to know what he had done. The name, the age, the details, he carried them. Chester Hollis, 41, a wife in Denver, 2 sons. Frank had learned this, and he had carried it, and he had taken the money, and he had left New Mexico territory, and he had sent the money to Texas for Rose. And then, 2 months later, he had understood that the money was not going to be enough to buy him clean, because Vane was not finished with him. Vane had the knowledge of what Frank had done, and knowledge like that, in the hands of a man like Vane, is not a transaction. It is a lease, permanent. Frank had spent the next 6 years doing the calculus of an impossible problem. If he ran, Vane would find him eventually, and the leverage would become action, testimony, evidence, a rope. If he stayed accessible, he was useful to Vane, and therefore relatively safe but permanently controlled. He had chosen accessible. he had also chosen to disappear from Rose's life. Because having Rose in his life meant Vane had access to Rose. He had thought this was protection. Standing in the alley in the pre-dawn, saying it out loud, he could hear how it sounded. He could hear the distance between what he had intended and what had actually happened. She grew up thinking you were dead, Rose said. I know. She, me. A beat. I grew up thinking you were dead. I know, Rosie. Don't, she said it quietly. Don't call me that right now. He stopped. She looked at him. She looked at her father, this man who was the source of every skill she had, every instinct, every piece of training that had kept her alive through 6 months in Cassidy Flats, and before that through everything else, who had put a gun in her hand when she was 4 years old and a philosophy in her head when she was 8, and then walked away and left her with both of them and nothing else. Will, she said. Frank's face changed. Tell me what happened with Will, he told her. In February of 1884, Vane had come to Frank at the ranch south of town. Not unusual, Vane came when he needed something. But this visit was different. He had a name. Will Donahue, A.U.S. Deputy Marshal, who was getting close to things that needed to stay buried. Vane wanted Frank to do what Frank had done in 1878. Frank had said no, which was also not unusual. Frank said no regularly. Said no, and then got worn down to yes, through the application of leverage and threat and the specific patient pressure that Vane was very good at. Except this time Frank said no and meant it, and Vane, who was good at reading people, could tell the difference. So Vane told Frank something. He told Frank that the deputy marshal who was getting close to things had a wife. A former associate of Frank's. No, not associate. That wasn't the right word. A student, a protege, someone Frank had trained. And he gave Frank a description. And Frank, who had not seen his daughter in 6 years, had recognized her. He had recognized her from the description of her eyes, her size, the specific way she was said to move through a room. And Vane had said, I don't need to do anything to her. I don't want to. But if her husband becomes a problem, can't be solved any other way, Frank had said, I'll take care of it. Meaning the investigation. Meaning he would find a way to slow Will down, to redirect him. To create enough noise in the evidence trail that Will would hit dead ends and eventually be reassigned. He had tried. He had sent a warning through a man in Socorro. Too late, too vague. The kind of warning that a careful, methodical man like Will Donahue would receive and note and continue working around. And Vane, growing impatient, had not waited for Frank's solution to take effect. Someone else had ridden to Cassidy Flats in March, and Will had not come home. Frank stopped talking. The alley was fully light now. The sun had come up while he was speaking, somewhere in the middle of it, and neither of them had noticed. The boarding house cast a long shadow west, and they were standing in it. Rose looked at her father. He was looking at the ground. You didn't pull the trigger, she said. No, but you didn't stop it. A long pause. No, he said. I didn't stop it. She was quiet. Not because she had nothing to say, because she had too much and none of it was ready. It was all tangled up in there together, the grief and the anger, and the thing that wasn't quite either of those, that complicated, specific ache of loving someone who has failed you so profoundly that the failure and the love become impossible to separate. She had spent a long time being careful about that tangle. She had kept it in the drawer. Now the drawer was open, and she was just going to have to stand here with it. What do you want? She said finally. He looked up. To fix it. He said, whatever that looks like. You can't fix Will. No. His voice was rough. I know I can't fix Will. Then what are you actually offering? He reached into his coat. He pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. He held them out. She took them, unfolded them, looked. Letters. Dated over 6 years. In Frank's handwriting. Detailing in the specific and careful language of a man who knows how evidence works, every job he had done for Edmund Vane. Every instruction received. Every result delivered. Names, dates, locations, amounts paid. Chester Hollis, November 1878, the road outside Socorro, a rifle at 200 yards, and 4 other names she didn't know. 4 other jobs between 1878 and 1884 that she hadn't been aware of. Huh? She looked up. You've been keeping these, she said, since 79. Why? He held her gaze. Because if it ever got to the point where someone was going to go down for all of it, he said, I wanted to make sure Vane went down too. She looked at the letters, then at him. Or, she said, because you knew someday you were going to have to account for it. He didn't answer, which was an answer. She folded the letters carefully and put them in her coat. Go back to the ranch, she said. Rose, go back. Stay there. Don't do anything. Don't contact Vane. Don't contact anyone. She looked at him. When I need you, I'll come to you, and if you don't need me. She looked at him for a long moment. Then the U.S. Marshals will, she said. She went back inside. She did not sleep. She sat at the desk in her room as the morning light moved across the floor, and she spread out everything she had. Will's journal, Frank's letters, the notation from Vane's geological survey, per prior arrangement, EV, the letter she had memorized from Vane's files, Alderman Cruz, Santa Fe, 3 previous operations, Judge Harcastle. She laid it all out. She looked at it. Then she started writing, not the full account, not yet, a summary, organized, precise, cross-referenced. The kind of document that a U.S. Marshal or a territorial governor's investigator could follow without needing her to explain each step. She wrote for 4 hours. At noon she stopped, read it back, made corrections, rewrote 2 sections. At 2 o'clock she had something. Not everything. Not the railroad contact, the man with the gold watch chain, the railroad pass, she didn't have his name yet, but everything else. The land fraud, the geological survey, the connection to the killing in 1878. Vane's direct correspondence naming his corrupt judge. Frank's letters connecting Vane to specific acts of violence. Enough. Enough to bring a careful, thorough investigation to Socorro County. Enough to make Vane's position untenable. Enough that no amount of lawyers or money or carefully maintained respectability would hold together against the weight of what was on these pages. Almost enough. She needed one more piece. She needed it delivered correctly, and she needed to do something first that she had been putting off. Not because she was afraid of it, because she had needed everything else in place before she could do it without the outcome going wrong. She put on her coat. She went to find Cut Broom. She found him where she expected to find him. The east end of the feed store lot where Vane's men kept their horses during the day. He was alone, which she had also expected. She had noticed, over the past week, that Broom had been quietly separating himself from the rest of Vane's operation. Not conspicuously, not in any way that would get back to Vane, but the distance was there, in the way he positioned himself in rooms and the conversations he did and didn't participate in. He was brushing down a gray roan when she came around the corner. He heard her. Did not startle, Miss Calloway, he said. Did not stop brushing. I need something from you, she said. He stopped brushing, turned. I need the name of Vane's contact at Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, she said. The man who sold him the route information. Broom looked at her for a long moment. That's a significant piece of information, he said. I know what it is. What are you going to do with it? I'm going to finish this, she said. He held her gaze. Craddock, he said. Raymond Craddock. He's a regional land manager for AT&SF, based in Albuquerque, a beat. He's the one who came in January. Vane's paid him in 3 previous deals. Has a wife and a position he'd very much like to keep. Raymond Craddock, she filed it. One more thing, she said. He waited. I need you to take a message to Santa Fe, she said. Tonight. She wrote the message herself. Sealed it. Addressed it to the office of the U.S. Marshal, Santa Fe, New Mexico Territory, Atten, Chief Marshal Delton Cray. Inside, a summary of the evidence. Not everything. Enough. Enough to get Cray moving. Enough to make the situation legible from 100 miles away. She also wrote a second letter. To the Territorial Governor's Office. The same summary, different framing. More emphasis on the corruption of Judge Harcastle, who was the weak link. A judge, with a documented arrangement with a land fraudster, was the kind of vulnerability that territories actively needed to be seen addressing in 1884, when statehood was a political conversation and legitimacy mattered. She gave both letters to Broom at 6 o'clock. He took them without comment. How long, she said. 2 days to Santa Fe and back if I push. He paused. What are you going to do for 2 days? Wait, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. I'd go faster, he said. But this horse has limits. So do I, she said. Go. He went. She taught school the next morning, and the morning after that. It was an extraordinary thing, she thought, sitting at her desk watching watching Tommy Sutherland work through a reading exercise with the ferocious disdain that was his signature style, the specific ordinariness of the school days. The way 14 children could render everything else temporary by simply needing to be taught. Long division, spelling, the names of the states and territories. She had them recite the capitals. It took 20 minutes and involved significant argument about whether Missouri or Kansas deserved a more favorable position in the recitation order, which was an argument that had no resolution and kept them occupied until lunch. She was glad of it. The waiting was the hardest part. It always had been. Her father had told her that once, and she had thought it was a thing people said, one of those pieces of wisdom that sounds true and is actually just filler. Then she had grown up and learned the specific weight of waiting. When the waiting was for something that mattered, she waited. She kept the documents in the locked steamer trunk. She kept the Colt where she could reach it in under 2 seconds. She went to bed each night with the Winchester leaned against the wall 3 feet from her left hand, and she waited. Vane moved on the second evening. She had expected it, had not known the shape of it. Vane was creative in the way that men with resources and intelligence and no ethical limits are creative. He could solve problems from angles you didn't anticipate. This angle was Ida Marsh. Rose came home from the schoolhouse at 3:30 to find Ida sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded in front of her and an expression on her face that Rose had not seen there before. Still, controlled, but something underneath it that Ida was working very hard to keep under the surface. Rose sat down. "Tell me," she said. "Vane came this morning," Ida said, "while you were at the school. What did he want?" "He wants you out." Ida's jaw was tight. "He's calling in the note on this building. I have a loan with his bank. Small one, I've been paying it regular for 2 years. He says I've violated the terms. On what grounds? He didn't specify." Ida looked at her. "He doesn't need to specify. It's his bank, his lawyer, his judge." Rose was quiet. "He's using me," Ida said, "to get to you." "Yes. How long have you known he might do this?" Rose looked at her. "I considered it a possibility." Ida held her gaze. "You considered it a possibility. I'm sorry, Ida." "A beat. Don't apologize," Ida said, and her voice was even, controlled. "But there was something in it. Just tell me one thing." "What? Are you going to finish this?" Rose looked at her directly. "Yes." Ida unfolded her hands, put them flat on the table. "Then get it done," she said. "I can hold Vane off for a few days on the loan. I've got a letter from his own bank confirming the terms, and they don't say what he says they say." "How do you know that?" "Because I read everything I sign," Ida said. "Unlike most people in this town." She stood up. "Supper's at 6. Don't be late." Rose stood up too. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. "Ida," she said. Ida looked at her. "When this is over," Rose said, "I'll make sure the note gets cleared." Ida looked at her for a long moment. "I know you will," she said. She went back to the stove. Cutter Broom came back on the 3rd day, late afternoon. He came to the back of the boarding house the same way Frank had, quiet, unhurried, a man who had learned long ago how to move without drawing attention. He found her in the small yard behind the building, where she had been splitting kindling, because splitting kindling was something to do with her hands, and her hands needed something to do. He sat on the fence rail. She split another piece, set the axe down. "Cray's coming," Broom said. "Sent word through his office. He's bringing 4 deputies. 2 days." She nodded. "Governor's office sent a separate communication," Broom added. "They're also sending an investigator. Something about judicial conduct. Judge Harcastle and Craddock," she said. "Cray's office will handle Craddock separately." Broom paused. Craddock folded when they contacted him. Apparently a man with a good position and a wife folds remarkably fast when someone starts asking questions about railroad land sales. She picked up another piece of wood, placed it on the block. 2 days, she said. 2 days. She split the piece, cleaned down the center. "Vane's going to know something is happening before they get here," she said. "He has sources. He always has sources. I know. When he knows, he'll move. I know that too." She looked at him. "Are you ready for what comes after this?" He understood what she was asking. Not the logistics. The other thing. The part where Cutter Broom, who had worked for Edmund Vane for 7 years and done things in that service that would require their own accounting, had to face what came next for himself. "I've been talking to Cray's office too," he said. "On my own account." She waited. "There are things I did that I can't walk away from," he said, "and things I can cooperate on that might make a difference in how it goes for me." He said it without drama, without self-pity. the flat, practical tone of a man taking inventory. I'm not asking for anything from you. I'm just telling you where I am. She picked up the axe again, split another piece. Dex Wills, she said. I talked to him. And he's 19 years old, Broom said. And he's scared, and he's not what Vane told him this job was going to be. He paused. I told him to get on a horse and go home to his mother in Las Cruces, did he? This morning. She set the axe down. Good. She went to see Frank that evening. 20 miles south. She rode hard and arrived at the ranch in the last of the light. The ranch was unremarkable, a working spread, cattle, 2 hands who weren't Vane's men, but who worked the land honestly and knew Bill Carver as a quiet, capable man who kept to himself and asked no questions about the arrangements of their employer. Frank was in the barn when she arrived. He heard her horse and came to the door with a lantern. They stood in the barn entrance. The horses, the smell of hay and leather, the last of the sunlight going red in the west. U.S. Marshals arrive in 2 days, she said. He absorbed this. I need you to be in Cassidy Flats when they get there, she said. He looked at her. You're going to give them your letters, she said, and you're going to tell them everything you told me. And you're going to do it standing up, in person, with your own name. I know, he said. You're not going to run. I'm not going to run. She looked at him. You have a choice right now. You can disappear again. There's still time. Cray doesn't know your name yet. She paused. But if you disappear, Vane's lawyers will find a way to make the letters disappear too. And everything Will found might not be enough without a witness. I know, Frank said again. And Chester Hollis's family has a right to know what happened to him. Something moved across Frank's face. Something old and complicated and without a name. I know that too, he said. She nodded. She turned to go. Rose, she stopped. He was quiet for a moment. The lantern light moved in the barn entrance. The horses shifted. Your mother, he said, would have been proud of you. She kept her back to him. Not of the gun, he said. Of this, of how you've thought it through, how you've done it right. She stood still. She would have been proud of you too, she said. If you'd turned up, if you'd been there. She got on her horse. She rode back toward Cassidy Flats in the dark. Vane moved on the morning of the 4th day. She had known he would. She had known approximately when, and she had known it would be significant. A man like Vane, sensing the walls closing in, does not go quietly. He pushes. He applies maximum force at the point of most vulnerability. She was the point of most vulnerability. Or he thought she was. He sent 10 men. Not Broom, not this time. Different men. She saw them coming from the schoolhouse window at 7 in the morning, before the children arrived, and she recognized 2 of them from Socorro. Professional. Not the local hired hands who could be discouraged with a shoulder wound. These ones were here to do a job and not stop until it was done. She had maybe 6 minutes. She used 4 of them. She went to the steamer trunk. She took out the document package. She had assembled everything. The summary, Will's journal, Frank's letters, the survey notation, the memorized letter transcribed in full, Craddock's name, Judge Harcastle. All of it organized and labeled. She divided it into 3 packets. One she sealed in an oilskin envelope. She went downstairs. Ida was in the kitchen. Ida looked at her, at the envelope. Put this in the bank box at your sister's house in Albuquerque. Rose said, send it today. Express rider. Ida took the envelope without a word. Rose went back upstairs, took the 2nd packet, went to the window, looked out. Sheriff Pruitt was at the end of the block, standing on the boardwalk outside his office, watching the 10 men ride in. He had his hat in his hands, and he was turning it in a slow circle, the way he did when he was thinking hard. She went out the front door, down the block. She reached Pruitt in 30 seconds. Olin, she said. He looked at her, then at the 10 men pulling up at the far end of the street. I need you to hold that package, she said. She put the 2nd packet in his hands. When the marshals from Santa Fe arrive. How long, he said. Tomorrow, maybe, the day a packet. He looked at the packet, at the men. Rose, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her name. There are 10 of them. I know. You can't. I'm not going to fight 10 men in the street, she said. That's not what this is. He looked at her. Then what is this? This, she said, is the part where you decide which side of the door you're on. He held her gaze. Long. The morning light was full and clear, and it showed every line in his face, and every year of careful choices, and the specific exhaustion of a man who has been sitting on the fence. For so long the fence has become uncomfortable. He put the packet inside his coat. My office, he said. Safe. I'll be in it. She nodded. She walked back toward the boarding house. The 10 men had dismounted, and at the other end of the street, Cutter Broom was walking toward them from the east. Slowly, deliberately, his coat open, hands visible, not to fight. She understood what he was doing. He was going to talk to them, buy time, use his history with Vane's operations to create friction and delay. He couldn't stop 10 men forever, but he could slow them. He could create the kind of confusion that comes when someone with authority over a situation starts asking questions and nobody's answers agree. She had not asked him to do this. He had seen the same thing she had and done the calculation himself. She was very tired of people who were better than they had decided to be arriving too late, but she was grateful for it now, regardless of the time. She went back inside. Third packet. She kept it. She went upstairs, sat on the bed, checked the Colt, checked the Winchester. Both loaded, both clean. She did not plan to use either of them if she could avoid it. Broom bought her 40 minutes. She could hear the conversation from her window, intermittently, not the words but the tone. Broom's voice measured. One of the other men's voices, harder, impatient. Broom again. More impatient voices. The kind of escalating argument between men who are not sure if the person they're arguing with has more authority than they do. 40 minutes. At 8 o'clock, the children started arriving for school. Tommy Sutherland came around the corner of the boarding house and stopped when he saw the horses outside and the men and Broom in the middle of the street. He looked up at the boarding house. He seemed to be deciding something. He walked past the horses, past the men, up to the boarding house door, knocked. Rose opened it. Tommy Sutherland, 10 years old, with his primer under his arm and dirt on his left knee, from something that had happened between his house and here, looked up at her with the serious face of someone who has been told by his father that sometimes you just have to show up. School starts at 8, he said. She looked at him. She looked at the street. She looked back at Tommy. It does, she said. She stepped aside. He went in. 11 other children arrived in the next 15 minutes. 2 parents, dropping their children off, stopped in the street and looked at the men and at Broom and at the boarding house. And then they stayed. They stayed on the street. The blacksmith came out of his shop. He stood in the doorway with his hammer. Old Pete Langford from the feed store stood outside his door. Not a posse, not an organized response. Just people who lived in a place, standing in their place, watching. The specific, ordinary, weightless thing that happens when enough people who have been scared for long enough decide to stop moving out of the way. Vane himself arrived at 9 o'clock, in his carriage. Alone, except for the driver, he wore his best suit, the gold watch chain. He stepped down from the carriage with the same practiced ease with which he did everything, the ease of a man who has been performing authority for so long it has become indistinguishable from the real thing. He walked to the center of the street. He looked at Broom, at the 10 men, at the townspeople. Then he looked up at the boarding house. Miss Calloway, he said, projecting, addressing the building. She was at the window. She did not answer. I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot, Vane said. The pleasant voice, the reasonable voice, the voice that had convinced 30 families across 4 counties to sign things they shouldn't have signed. I think there's been a misunderstanding about my intentions here. And I believe we can resolve this like reasonable people. From the window she watched him work the street, watched him turn the performance toward the townspeople, the reasonable, measured man, the business partner, the investor in the community. She had watched him do this before. She picked up the 3rd packet. She went downstairs. She opened the front door. She walked out onto the porch, and she walked down to the street. Vane watched her come. The 10 men shifted. She walked past them. She walked past Broom, who said nothing, and moved just slightly to create space for her. She stopped 8 feet from Edmund Vane. He looked at her with the gold watch chain and the excellent suit and the practiced smile and the eyes that were always one beat ahead. Miss Calloway, he said, I'm glad you came out. I've been hoping we could have a direct conversation. We can, she said. She held up the packet. He looked at it. What's that? He said. His voice was still pleasant, still controlled, but something in it shifted, something below the surface. Chester Hollis, she said. Vane's eyes moved. Gideon Raft, she said. The Taggart brothers. The 3 operations before this one. The pleasant expression did not go away, but it stopped connecting to anything underneath it, like a painting of a smile. like the surface of a thing that had lost its structure. Raymond Craddock, she said. And that was the one. That was the one that did it. Vane moved, not toward her, not with his hands. He moved with his eyes, a quick, lateral movement toward the 10 men, the specific gesture of a man who is accustomed to having problems solved by other people. And she said, "Don't, just that," quietly, because Broom was already between Vane and his men, not with a gun, standing like a wall, and Sheriff Pruitt was walking down the street toward them, walking slowly, with his badge on, with his hand at his side, and the blacksmith had come fully out of his shop, and Pete Langford had stepped off his porch, and the parents who had stopped on their way home from dropping their children at school had not, in fact, gone home. Vane looked around him. He looked at the people of Cassidy Flats standing in their street in their ordinary morning clothes. Not armed, most of them, not organized, not there as a fighting force, just there. Rose looked at Vane. U.S. Marshals arrived tomorrow, she said. Chief Marshal Cray from Santa Fe, 4 deputies, and a man from the governor's office about Judge Harcastle. She paused. This package has everything they're going to find when they get here. I'm giving you a chance to know what's coming. Vane looked at the packet, then at her. The mask had not come off entirely. Men like Vane do not let the mask come off in public. The years of training for this kind of moment, the years of projecting certainty and control, they don't vanish in a second. But behind the mask she could see it, the calculation running, the options being assessed and discarded. The specific moment when a man who has built everything on the premise that he is always the smartest person in the room begins to understand that he may have made an error in that assessment. "You're a schoolteacher," he said. His voice was still even, but the pleasant was entirely gone now. What was left was just the mechanism underneath it. "I'm a schoolteacher," she said. "You're a woman in the New Mexico Territory in 1884, and I think, she said, that you should sit down with your lawyer before tomorrow morning, because what's in this packet is also in Sheriff Pruitt's office, and also in Albuquerque in a bank box with instructions to forward it to the marshals if I don't send word by Friday, and it's in my head, and you're running out of ways to make information disappear." Vane was very still. The watch chain caught the light. "I think," she said, "that you've been doing this long enough to know when it's done." A long silence, the street, the morning light, the smell of horse and dust, and somewhere behind her, the sound of children's voices from the schoolhouse. Vane looked at her for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "For her alone, your father's name is in those letters." "I know," she said. "He'll go to prison." "I know you'd do that to your own father." She looked at him. "My father made his choices," she said. "He's making a different one now. That's between him and whatever comes next." She paused. "You don't get to use him anymore. That's done." Vane was quiet. He looked at the packet one more time. Then he looked at the 10 men. He looked at Broom. He looked at the townspeople. He looked at Sheriff Pruitt, who had arrived at the edge of the gathering and was standing with his hands at his sides and his badge on his chest, and the very particular expression of a man who has finally decided. Edmund Vane adjusted his watch chain. He turned. He walked back to his carriage. He got in. The driver looked at him. Vane said something. The driver clicked to the horses and the carriage moved south. The 10 men stood in the street without orders. Broom said something to them. Low. Certain. One by one they got on their horses. They rode south after the carriage. The street was very quiet. Tommy Sutherland's voice came through the schoolhouse window, reading something aloud, slowly, getting every word. The blacksmith walked back into his shop. Pete Langford went back to his feed store. The parents walked home. Pruitt walked up to Rose. He stood beside her and they both watched the last of the men disappear around the far bend. "That it?" he said. "That's part of it," she said. He nodded slowly. "Tomorrow's going to be complicated," he said. "Yes, I'll have the coffee on." She looked at him. "Thank you, Olin," she said. He put his hat back on, walked back toward his office. Ida Marsh was in the boarding house doorway. She and Rose looked at each other across the distance of the yard. Ida went inside. Rose followed. Frank Calloway arrived in Cassidy Flats the next morning, before the marshals. Early. He came in alone, no announcement, tied his horse outside the sheriff's office, and walked in. Pruitt was there. Rose was there. Frank sat down in the chair across from Pruitt's desk. He put his hands flat on the desk. He said, "My name is Frank Calloway. I have information about crimes committed in New Mexico territory. I'd like to make a statement. Pruitt looked at him, looked at Rose, looked back at Frank. He got out paper and a pen. Go ahead, he said. Chief Marshal Delton Cray arrived at 2 in the afternoon with 4 deputies and a man named Whitfield from the governor's office who wore a city suit and had the specific pallor of someone who had been on a horse for 2 days and was not accustomed to it. Rose met them at the edge of town. She gave Cray the packet. He read the summary standing in the street, his 4 deputies waiting behind him, and his face went through several changes that Rose catalogued without much expression. When he finished, he looked up at her. How long have you been working on this? He said. 7 months, she said. He looked at her for a moment. You're Will Donahue's wife, he said. I was. He was quiet for a moment. He had known Will. She could see it in the way he said it. I'm sorry about Will, he said. Simply. Thank you, she said. He folded the packet. Where is Vane? His property south of town. He hasn't run. He's waiting for his lawyer to arrive from Albuquerque. She paused. He may have thought the marshals wouldn't come, or came too fast. We came fast, Cray said. I noticed. He almost smiled. Did not quite. And the witness, he said. Sheriff's office. He's been waiting since 8 this morning. Cray looked at her. Your father, he said. Yes. Another quiet moment. That's a hard thing, Cray said. Yes, she said. It is. He nodded once. He turned to his deputies. He began issuing instructions. Rose stepped back. She watched the marshals move through Cassidy Flats with the specific, efficient purpose of men who know exactly what they're doing and have the authority to do it. Cray toward the sheriff's office, 2 deputies toward Vane's bank, 2 toward the South Road. She stood in the street. The sun was high and clear, and the October light in New Mexico territory was the particular sharp gold that it gets this time of year, the kind that makes everything look both very close and very far away simultaneously. She thought about Will. She thought about the journal, the careful handwriting, the names and dates, and the specific methodical patience of a man who believed that the right kind of attention to the right kind of evidence was, in the long run, stronger than any other force. He had been right. He just hadn't gotten to see it. Vane was taken into custody at 4 in the afternoon. Rose was not there for it. She had deliberately not been there for it. This was not a moment she needed to witness. She had done the work. The work was finished. The witnessing was for other people. She was at the schoolhouse. 3:30 had come, and the children had been dismissed, and she was sitting at her desk grading the week's spelling tests, which was something she had always done on Friday afternoons, and she was going to do it today because it was Friday afternoon. And the children's spelling did not stop requiring attention, because the world outside had done something significant. Tommy Sutherland had spelled all 12 words correctly. This was, in its way, as satisfying as anything else that had happened this week. She heard about Vane's arrest from Ida, who heard it from Pete Langford, who had been watching from his doorway. Vane had not resisted. He had come to the door of his house in his vest and his watch chain, and Cray had presented the warrant, and Vane had looked at it for a long moment and then said that he would need to collect some items. Cray had said that would be fine. Vane had gone inside and come back with his coat. He had walked to the marshal's horses without being escorted. Like he was going to a meeting, Ida said. That's what Pete said, like it was a business appointment. Rose thought about that. She thought about what it cost a man like Vane to do that, to walk out cleanly, to not perform outrage or innocence, to simply go. She thought it probably cost him more than anything else had. And Broom, she said, turned himself in this morning, Ida said. Apparently he had a conversation with one of the deputies on their way here, worked something out. She set a cup of coffee in front of Rose. Remarkable thing, a man deciding to do right by his own feet. Rose wrapped her hands around the cup. What about the 2 men from the bank, she said. Taken in for questioning, Ida sat down. Whitfield, the governor's man, has been in Pruitt's office for 3 hours. I imagine the bank records are getting a very thorough reading right now. Rose nodded. Ida watched her. You all right? Ida said. Rose thought about it honestly. I don't know yet, she said. Ask me in a week. Ida nodded. That's a fair answer. Frank's statement took 4 hours. Cray sat across from him with 2 deputies, and a court recorder and a pile of paper, and Frank talked. The same way he had talked in the alley at dawn, without management, without shaping. All of it. Chester Hollis, the 4 subsequent jobs, the arrangement with Vane, the leverage, the warning he had sent Will, the things he had tried to do, and the things he had done, and the things he had not done when he should have. He was arrested when he was finished. Rose was waiting outside when they brought him out. He saw her. He stopped walking for just a moment. She looked at him. She did not stop him, did not go to him. She let the deputies walk him to their horses. But she did not look away. She let him see her looking. She let him know that she was there, and that she was watching, and that she was not going to look away from this part any more than from any other part. He held her gaze until they turned the corner. Then he was gone. She stood in the street. 1 breath, 2. She went back to the boarding house. 3 days passed. Then 5, then a week. Cray remained in Cassidy Flats with his deputies processing the evidence. Whitfield sent communications to Santa Fe that apparently resulted in Judge Harcastle's immediate suspension and the announcement of an investigation. Raymond Craddock of the Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe Railway, reached by telegraph in Albuquerque, agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for terms that were not made public. The families, the Ellisons, the Taggarts, Pete Cousins and his wife, the others, their cases would take longer. The legal machinery for reversing fraudulent land transfers was slow and complicated and would involve more lawyers and more arguments than Rose could follow from a schoolhouse in Cassidy Flats. But it was moving. The machinery was moving. She taught school, she graded papers. She ate breakfast with Ida, and supper with Ida, and in between, she taught reading and arithmetic, and the names of the states and territories and the specific, difficult, essential skill of sounding out a word you've never seen before. Tommy Sutherland read his first full chapter of a book. He came up to her desk after school one afternoon, a week after the marshals arrived, with the primer open to the last page of the chapter and his finger on the final word. "I finished it," he said. "I see that," she said, "all the way through." He looked up at her. "Does it get easier? The longer ones?" She considered it honestly. "It gets different," she said. "You learn to trust yourself, that you'll get to the end." He thought about this. "Okay," he said. He closed the primer. He put it in his bag and walked out. Cray came to see her on the 8th day. He came to the schoolhouse after hours, knocked on the door, sat in the chair she offered him across from her desk. He was a solid, gray-haired man of 52 who had been a marshal for 23 years. And seen missions and had the specific quality of someone who has seen enough of the West's violence that almost nothing surprises him, but almost everything still bothers him. "Vane goes to Santa Fe next week," he said. "Trial probably 6 months out. Your evidence package is going to be central. I know. We'll need you to testify. I'll be available." He looked at her. "You're planning to stay?" "I'm planning to finish the school term," she said. "After that, I don't know." He nodded. He turned his hat in his hands. "Your father goes to Santa Fe with Vane," he said. "His cooperation carries weight. The DA from the territory is looking at a reduced charge, possibly significant reduction, given the depth of cooperation." He paused. "I can't promise anything, but it won't be the worst outcome." She looked at her desk. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Will Donahue was a good man," Cray said. "Good marshal. I should have paid more attention when the accident report came in." He said it directly, without excuse. "I'm sorry for that." She looked up at him. "He knew the risks," she said. "He did it anyway." "That was Will." Cray nodded. "It was," he said. He stood up, put his hat on. He started toward the door. "Marshal," she said. He turned. "The 3 previous operations," she said. "Before this county, the family's there." "We're looking," he said. "It'll take time, but we're looking." She nodded. He walked out. She stayed for the rest of the term. November into December. The cold coming down properly from the mountains now, frost on the windows in the mornings, the children arriving in coats with their breath showing. She built the fire earlier. She kept the schoolhouse warm. She taught them reading, writing, arithmetic, the slow, essential work of giving someone the tools to understand their own world. On the last day of the term, the children brought her things. Tommy Sutherland brought a piece of carved wood. His father had made a small horse, rough but recognizable, with a careful attention to the angle of the legs. A girl named Abigail Press brought a jar of honey from her family's hives. The youngest, a 6-year-old named Sam, who had not been able to read a single word in September and could now read simple sentences, brought her a drawing, a woman, stick figure, in a dress, very small, in the middle of a street that took up most of the paper. Sam had signed it with his own name. Slow, deliberate, every letter formed completely. She looked at the drawing for a long time. "Thank you, Sam," she said. He beamed. She dismissed them at 3 o'clock, stood in the doorway and watched them go. That evening she sat with Ida, not at the table, in the 2 chairs on the boarding house porch, wrapped in coats, with coffee, watching the December dark come in over the desert. They did not talk for a long time. "You're leaving," Ida said eventually. "After Christmas," Rose said. "I'll stay through the holiday." "Where?" Rose looked at the dark. "I don't know yet," she said. Ida was quiet. "There's a family in Albuquerque that has a school," Ida said. "I know the woman who runs it." She mentioned needing a teacher. Rose looked at her. "She's particular," Ida said. "Difficult to please. The children are unruly and the pay is adequate at best." "Sounds familiar," Rose said. Ida almost smiled. "I could write," she said. Rose looked back at the dark. "You could write," she said. She left on a Thursday morning in January. The ground was hard and the sky was clear, and the mountains to the north had snow on them that caught the morning sun and turned it silver. She packed the steamer trunk, the Winchester, the books she'd acquired over 6 months, the letters she'd kept, the small carved horse from Tommy's father, the drawing from Sam, the jar of honey. She did not pack the colt. She stood in her room and looked at it for a long time. She thought about her father, standing in the barn entrance with his lantern. The way he'd looked old in a way that had nothing to do with years. The way the weight of what he'd done had become visible in him. The way such things eventually become visible in everyone. She thought about Will, the careful handwriting, the unfinished sentence with the dash at the end. She thought about Chester Hollis, 41, a wife in Denver, 2 sons, who had made a survey and put it in his saddlebag and ridden a road in Socorro County in November of 1878 and not come home. She picked up the colt. She unloaded it. She placed it on the small desk beside the window, not because she was done with who she was, because she was choosing for now not to carry it. That was different. That was the thing her father had never quite managed. Not the stopping, the choosing. The difference between a door that closes on you and a door you close yourself. She picked up her bag. She went downstairs. Ida was at the kitchen table. There was coffee and a wrapped package beside the cup. "For the road," Ida said. Rose sat down, drank the coffee. It was hot and strong and exactly what she needed. She looked at Ida Marsh across the kitchen table, 45 years old, iron gray braid, a face that had been outdoors for all of those years. A woman who had built something and kept it and read everything she signed and served coffee at 5:30 whether anyone came or not. "You're going to be all right," Rose said. "I always have been," Ida said. Rose stood up. She picked up the package. She picked up her bag. "Ida," she said. Ida looked at her. "Thank you," Rose said. "For all of it." Ida waved a hand. "Don't be sentimental, I mean it. I know you do." She looked at her directly. "Now go." Rose went. She rode east out of Cassidy Flats into the clear January morning. The desert was still, the mountains silver-white to the north. The road stretched out ahead of her, red dirt and pale sky and the enormous, indifferent, magnificent emptiness of a territory that was still deciding what it was going to be. She did not look back, not because she was hard, not because she didn't feel it, because she knew what was behind her, and she knew what was ahead, and looking back at this moment would confuse the two. She rode. 3 months later, the trial of Edmund Vane began in Santa Fe, New Mexico Territory. Rose testified on the second day. She stood in the witness box in the same gray dress she had worn to every school day in Cassidy Flats, and she answered every question with the same precise, unhurried clarity she had brought to everything else. Vane sat at the defense table in his excellent suit. He did not look at her. She answered the questions, all of them, about Will, about the evidence, about what she had found and how and when. When the prosecution was finished, the defense attorney stood. He was a tall man from Albuquerque with a reputation and expensive boots. He looked at Rose in the witness box. "Miss Calloway," he said. "You are, is that correct, a school teacher?" She looked at him. "That's correct," she said. He looked at his papers, at the jury, back at her. "A school teacher," he said again, as if the repetition would illuminate something. She waited. He seemed to be trying to find the angle of attack, the place where she was vulnerable, the thread to pull. He was looking at the wrong woman. He had been looking at the wrong woman the moment he decided that the size of a person or the cut of their clothing or the position they held in a small desert town, was a reliable indicator of what they were capable of. "No further questions," he said. She stepped down. Edmund Vane was convicted on 11 counts. He was sentenced to 22 years in the New Mexico Territorial Prison. Frank Calloway was convicted on 2 counts, reduced from 5. He was sentenced to 8 years. He served 6. Rose received a letter from him in the 3rd year, careful handwriting, the kind that takes time. She read it twice. She wrote back once. It was not a long letter, but it was honest. Cutter Broom's cooperation resulted in a suspended sentence and 2 years probation. He returned to Texas. Rose did not hear from him again. She thought about him sometimes. She thought he was probably all right. Judge Hardcastle was removed from the bench. He did not go to prison. Some things don't go the way they should. Raymond Craddock lost his position with the railroad and his standing in Albuquerque. He moved east with his wife. Rose had no feelings about this either way. The families, the Ellisons, the Taggarts, Pete Cousins and his wife, their cases took 2 years to resolve. Most of them received compensation. A few received their land back. Not all, not everything. Chester Hollis's wife in Denver was notified. Rose did not know what she said when she heard. Did not know what it was like to finally receive an answer after 6 years of not knowing. She hoped it was better than not knowing. She suspected it was both better and worse. She taught at the school in Albuquerque. Ida's contact was a woman named Mrs. Abernathy who was, as promised, particular and difficult to please. The children were unruly. The pay was adequate at best. Rose liked it considerably. She taught them to read first, always reading first. A person who can read can learn anything else on their own. She had a room in a boarding house on the east side of the city, with a window that faced the mountains. The Sandia Mountains, which turned pink at sunset, in a way that stopped being surprising and never stopped being worth looking at. She was there for 3 years. Then she moved again. She was like that. Cassidy Flats remembers her in the way that small towns remember people who came through them and left something behind that couldn't be explained and didn't need to be. The children who sat in that schoolhouse grew up. Tommy Sutherland became a lawyer. He told people, when they asked him why, that his teacher had told him a person who can read can learn anything else on their own, and he had decided to see how far that went. Sam, who had brought the drawing, grew up to teach school himself. In Albuquerque, as it happened, he was a patient teacher, unhurried. He had a habit of sitting very still in a way that made children feel they had his complete attention. He always did. The Colt stayed on the desk in the schoolhouse for 2 years. The teacher who replaced Rose moved it to the drawer. Nobody threw it away. Nobody ever threw it away. There is a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, that wears a plain dress and keeps its back to the wall and rises at 4:30 in the morning, not because it has to, but because the day is already started and it means to catch up, that measures the distance to every door and counts the people in every room and knows exactly how much weight is in its right hand and what it can do with that weight when the moment requires it, and then sets that weight down when the moment is finished, not because the weight is gone, because there is a difference between what you can carry and what you choose to carry. And because some things you put down are not lost, they are left, intentionally, in a place where people will know you were there, on a desk in a schoolhouse in the desert, where a child might look at it and wonder, and then pick up a book instead.